Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 563rd Board Meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I would like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. Two board members will be appearing later today. One of them is Raji Barr of Bakersfield and Denise Cadera of Allensworth, and they both are sitting on my left. On my far right is Dan Markham of Fall River Mills. Sitting next to Dan is Bob Schneider of Davis. On my immediate right is our vice chairman, Carmen Ramirez of Atwater, and my name is Carl Longley of Fresno. State Board Didi D'Amato will be here a little later to give an update on state board activities. I'll now.
Here already.
Oh, Didi here? Hi, Didi. I'll introduce the executive officer who will introduce executive officers, the board staff. Excuse me.
Hey, good morning, Chair Longley. To my immediate right, I have Jessica Yar from the Office of Chief Counsel, Senior Counsel to the Board. To my far left, Kieran Lanfranchi-Rosardi, my Executive Assistant and Clerk to the Board. And to my immediate left, I have Adam Lapitz, Assistant Executive Officer in the Rancho Cordova office. Across from me on the timer is Christine Urich, one of our support staff in the Rancho Cordova office. To her left, Andrew Altavote, here making a special appearance. As you may know, he is on temporary assignment to the Division of Drinking Water, helping out with securing clean water for some of the valley communities. And to his left is David Lancaster from the Office of Chief Counsel. And then right in front of me, Bailey Toft Dupuis, another attorney with the Office of Chief Counsel. And right behind me, we have Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer in the Redding office, and Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office, and a number of staff in the audience as well.
Thank you very much. At this time, we're ready for the Pledge of Allegiance. Carmen, could you lead us, please?
I would please stand. Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Carl, if I may, that saying the pledge is particularly poignant today as it's D-Day, 75th year, I won't say a celebration, but 75th anniversary since the original D-Day in World War II.
Very important commemoration, and thank you very much, Bob, for mentioning that. Yes, that was a pivotal day in our history, certainly. We'll move to agenda item 2 and briefly discuss meeting procedures. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda and are available here at the staff table and upon request. And they're posted on the board's website and are summarized on the computer screens during breaks. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Lanfranchi-Rosardi, our administrative assistant, sitting here at the staff table. Moving on to agenda item 3, board member communications.
Very quickly, my apologies. The agenda items in your packet were apparently mislabeled. Number 2 is a consideration of minutes from prior board meetings. I think we just dispensed with one, which was the meeting rules. So agenda item 2 would be consideration of the minutes from the past board meetings.
Great. We'll go to that. I believe those are in the packet provided to you. Do I have a motion?
I would move to approve as presented.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Schneider? Mr. Markham, Dr. Markham?
Aye.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Okay, I believe we're ready now for agenda item 3.
Absolutely.
Very good. Some years ago, 20 years ago to be exact, as the Dean of Engineering in Fresno State, together with one of the professors, Walter Mizuno, he started a program called the Valley Industry Partnership Program, and that the VIP program, and that program's purpose was to work with industries to give good work time experience internships to students. And one of the more valuable programs I think that we've had at Fresno State. I'm very proud to be able to introduce Brisa Cueras. Dr. Cueras, please stand. And Dr. Cueras is now responsible for that program, and she's going to be celebrating the industry partners, and I think you have 26 of them, you told me now. It's something, the programs like this, thank you very much. Programs like this are very important for students. Many of these students become our engineers, and similar programs at the university become our geologists and environmental science folks down the road. Real-time experience. The regional board has not been a partner to this program. The way the program's set up, it's difficult for governmental agencies to be partners, but at the same time, the regional board and other agencies such as Department of Water Resources, Caltrans, and so forth provide valuable work experience for students. It's been an important part of my life, and I want to commend the doctor on the good work she's doing. With that, any board member communication?
And if I could, Dr. Longley, I would suggest if you want to drop your contact information. I think that fortunately the State Water Board and John Russell, who works with the Division of Administrative Services, have been working to kind of expand the latitude that the regional boards have for internship programs. We've got a pilot one that's up and running right now, and I think input like from other organizations, other academic institutions about how we could adapt our programs to make sure that they provide value to your students, so that we can continue to keep that pipeline open, would be really valuable to us. So. Drop your card, and we'll see if we can chat a little bit about what the needs are for your program, and see if we can, as we expand our opportunities in the years to come, if we can try and get those two to mesh. So I very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That's valuable input. Back to board member communications.
Well, I'll say a few things. Went to the meeting in Reading with the State Board. The two-day meeting was very good. I really enjoyed the field tours. I particularly liked the stop we made to listen to the Western Shasta RCD and their restoration activities after the fire. I think RCDs in the future are going to play a key role to education about water quality and restoration activities and such. And along those same lines, last week I had a conversation with Ned Coe. He presented to us a meeting or two ago and about the upper pit and the segmenting activities, and Adam Lapis there has been up there to talk to him, and he wondered, how are things going to move forward, and I suggested that, he has to, it's a two-way street. Our staff can't always go out and do everything for everybody. They have to come to us and participate in the decision-making process. So my tip to Ned is, the Modoc RCD is a good RCD. They've got a watershed coordinator, similar to Fall River. They've got a watershed coordinator. Is to, from the grassroots, talk to us. We know the rules. We'll explain it to them, but they have to come halfway and meet with us for their activities to understand these systems and how to improve water quality. Yeah, so. Those are my two tips for today. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Bob?
I have a couple. I also attended the state board meeting in Reading and got to visit with Dee Dee there and some of the other state board members. And I too enjoyed the tour, in particular to Iron Mountain Mine. And in 2000, I was on the board when they adopted an order that provided for ongoing restoration, pollution abatement at that mine. What was interesting to me in particular, well, I hadn't been on a tour. I was really embarrassed about that, so now I've been there. But this was after the Carr fire, and I think this is one of the most important pollution abatement projects that this board's undertaken. And it's ongoing, and they like to say mines are forever. Of course, from a geologist standpoint, that's not quite true, but in terms of like, our country's been here 300 years, and this will be at least 1,000 years or more of ongoing treatment. It gives you a little scale of the problem. I mean, there's just, over 20 miles of adits throughout this mine. It's all draining. It's getting acid mine drainage. And the way they treat this is they add lime and neutralize the acid mine drainage, and then all the heavy metals precipitate out. And that's a lot of lime. It comes in train cars from Colorado or Utah or other places. And when the Camp Fire actually happened, it disrupted some of these deliveries. If you don't get it there, all that pollutant's going to start going back down the Sacramento River. And EPA jumped in actually at a very high level, and they rerouted cars and made sure they got there. Because they can't store them at the mine. They have a storage place in Redding, but this is like a 2-lane dirt road, and the car fire was roaring. The car fire burned all the way around the major treatment facilities and could have easily taken them out. So it's a testament to the people working there who worked in that mine. One of the really scary things with this fire actually entered the mine shaft, the adit, and back east in coal, you get a fire in a mine and they go on forever, and that could happen in this place too. And EPA again stepped in and brought crews that they had that were experienced in fighting these type of fires to put out this fire before it reached back to the ore bodies. So how delicate that was, that just could have crashed that whole treatment facility, was kind of an eye-opener that what we do is really important. Sometimes it's tenuous, and we just have to be tenacious and keep at it. So it's a testament to our staff and the other people working on this, I think, that this was implemented and this program's ongoing. So I quite enjoyed that. I went to the Delta Tributary Mercury Council meeting. This is coordinated by Stephen McCord. We had a staff member there who's, I'm embarrassed, her name eludes me, but I'm sure Janice Cook could remind me, who's in the audience I saw. So it was nice to have representation there. This has been going on a very long time, and they're really beginning to look at some strategic planning of who they are, how do they move forward into the future. I think they play an important role, even if they're just getting people together every couple of months to talk about and communicate about what the problems are and what the progress is in terms of mercury pollution and remediation projects. I've participated in Firescape Mendocino, which is a stakeholder group that's working closely with the leadership in the Mendocino National Forest, and that's been going on for about 5 years. And I think the relationships that have developed over that time have been really, really helpful in terms of the public interacting with the Forest Service staff on the ranch fire in the Mendocino Fire Complex. So, and they've started a project in terms of the North Shore Restoration Project. A lot of this is in the WUI zone, not all of it is. I think out of that meeting, one of the most interesting things to me was some work that Hugh Safford's done with the Forest Service. He's their ecologist for Region 5, and he really looked at the probability of forest restoration without some management. And those areas where the soils are sterilized, the trees are all dead, there's no seed bank, the prospects are pretty grim, but you can see, there's an 80% probability this isn't going to come back without some management. And it really helps focus where your attention needs to be. So I think that's a new tool that's going to be quite useful. Our staff's been involved with the bear assessment, the Burn Area Emergency Response Team assessment of that fire, and I think that was helpful too. And the last thing is, yesterday I couldn't make the Clear Lake Blue Ribbon Coalition meeting, January 5th, that was in, and we had Jennifer LeBay for our staff was there looking at that, and they had a tour of the Sulphur Bank mine, which is a EPA Superfund site, and that, she's really doing a great job participating both in the meetings and on the technical committees looking at improving water quality and social economic issues around Clear Lake and Lake County. So, thank you.
Thank you. That was a real comprehensive and informative summary, Bob. Thank you very much, particularly on the work going on both at Clear Lake and up in Redding area on the Carr Fire, and the issues around Iron Mountain. I have participated in some CV Salts meetings and also participated in regional board chairs meeting regarding the enforcement policy. I think this was the regional board's meeting held on 24 May. Once a year, the regional board chairs get together. And there was a item on that agenda on enforcement policy. A lot of the work, and I might point out that Andrew Out of Oak did a good job of getting me briefed up before that meeting. But, and I think it would be worthwhile somewhere down the road to have a information item on enforcement policy for an update. And I could go into more detail what we discussed at that point. But certainly, this region, I think, has been at the forefront insofar as enforcement policy. I think our compressed stormwater waste discharge requirements are a good example of that. Certainly the activities we've taken after we've passed the updated irrigated lands program to get membership up shows how we use enforcement when we have to make programs successful. There's other examples, but those two come to my mind. And I want to thank the enforcement staff and Andrew for his leadership there as we go forward. The other thing was that that on the 10th of May, I gave a presentation at the State Board workshop on treating residual streams from water treatment plants. And that was at the third Drinking Water Needs Assessment Workshop. It pointed out that there's a lot of work to do, that providing individual treatment systems for small communities doesn't work very well. The O&M costs are just unaffordable, that we need to look at regionalization of these plants. And this is a point where we get a crossover between the Division of Drinking Water and the Regional Board, in the sense that these residual streams have to be handled in some way or another, and that is a Regional Board issue. Sat in on at conference calls on all kinds of briefings of state board members. Dee Dee knows about those. Having to do with CV salts, and recognize that there is going to be a workshop at the State Board on the 2nd of July on CV salts, on the Basin Plan amendments that we passed about over a year ago, the last day of May, 31 May of 2018, and that we're anticipating that the State Board will be considering the adoption of those Basin Plan amendments after that workshop, sometime after that workshop. And I don't think there's a formal date that has been announced yet. There is a working date, I know, but so I assume that if any regional board members want to attend, we end up with 3 or more, that there's not an issue, since that's a notice meeting. Is that correct?
For the state board meeting, absolutely appropriate for as many of you to attend as you want.
So please put it on your calendar. I think it would be good to have a showing there at that workshop. With that,
Carl?
yes.
I missed a note. I wanted to add one more thing. As I read about some of EPA's, at the federal level, relaxation of regulations, and California's been responding to some of those, and I think it would be nice maybe in the executive officer report just to have a brief summary of what that is to date, and then keep us up to date on that.
Certainly, I think the to be honest, there's been a lot of discussion at the federal level, particularly with respect to US EPA about rolling back regulations. But at the regional board, we've actually seen a lot of smoke, but not much fire. The one exception to that would be the Waters of the United States rule, which, as proposed, would dramatically alter the scope of federal waters that fall under federal jurisdiction. I think the state board, in some respect, responded to that by implementing a new wetlands policy. We are working with our staff on how we are going to work that through, because the bottom line is that within the state of California, you have to protect beneficial uses in waters, regardless of whether they're federal or state waters. And certainly the state waters cover many, many water bodies, surface and groundwater, that are not protected under federal laws. So I fully anticipate probably in August, maybe a board meeting after that, as we work on getting some of the guidance for the implementation of the wetland policy together, we'll have an information item before the board to talk about that. And I think that's a significant one. If there's any other kind of major federal rollbacks or federal changes, I'll absolutely put those in the executive officer report as to what our response will be to that.
I appreciate Member Schneider bringing that up, because although I don't have a lot of people that reach out to me directly, the times that they have been reaching out to me lately has been with this uncertainty with EPA regulations and what is the state of California going to do and what can they expect coming forward. So an informational item in the future would really be helpful.
And I think, to be honest, we've maintained very open channels of communication with US EPA Region 9. And to a large extent with respect to their water programs, again, aside from the Waters of the United States rule, and aside from some funding issues that we're trying to work through, much of what they do on the day-to-day basis is the usual civil service work, and that has not changed, despite sometimes there being a little bit of chaos at the top. So we'll keep you updated. We'll let you know if there's any major changes in any type of policies and any type of guidance coming from US EPA Region 9. But I will say that we have a very good working relationship with US EPA Region 9. The laws haven't changed. You know, the Clean Water Act is still there, still as solid as it ever was. And it's just a matter of figuring out what is going to be prioritized and what is not going to be prioritized by the administration as we work with them to make sure that the requirements are being met in California.
Thank you. Any further comments by board members? If not, then do we move on to agenda item 4? Do we have any cards? Yes, please. Thank you. And this agenda item is for anyone wishing to speak on any topic which is not on the agenda today. Sally Barron wishes to speak to the board. Come forward, please, to the microphone. And she wishes to speak on sewage down Mule Creek. And you have 3 minutes, ma'am. If you need additional time,
Thank you, Andrew.
we appreciate if you could keep it within 3 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. My name is Sally Barron, and in February, I was here to express my growing concern over the raw sewage being discharged into Mule Creek by Mule Creek State Prison. It's now June. Raw sewage is still going down Mule Creek, and the Water Board has done nothing. The much ballyhooed well testing program to make sure our wells are safe began and ended with one test conducted in the spring of 2018. At the same February meeting, a board member asked the executive officer for a tour of the dairies. Mr. Paloopa's answer was a series of yeah. Did you ever get the tour? As board members, you have the responsibility.
Ma'am, we did get a tour.
You did?
At our April board meeting, yes.
Good, excellent. As board members, you have the responsibility to make sure that the career bureaucrats involved in the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Board are following all state and regulation and federal laws and enforcing them in a fair and impartial manner. No special treatment for other state agencies like Mule Creek State Prison. In fact, Mr. Paloopa stated that if farmers do not make voluntary contributions to the oxygenation project for the Deepwater Channel, then he could make them contribute by using law as a hammer. This is not fair. This is blackmail, pure and simple. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, there's a few issues there. I think we're talking about three distinct issues. I'm glad I did take you on the tour of the dairies in April, which is one concern raised. The other concern raised was the operation of the Stockton Deepwater Ship Channel aerator, which is still going as planned, and the agricultural community is contributing to the operation of that aerator. And we are pleased with how that's going, but we maintain oversight over that. And the remark that nothing has been done at Mule Creek State Prison, that is absolutely false. We've been working to enroll them under the small MS4 permit. We've been reviewing plans with them, and we've compelled them to engage in some of the preeminent scientists in the state of California, if not the country, in the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, SQUIRP, to teach them how to do better sampling protocols and to make sure that the sampling that they provide to the public and to the State Water Board and to the Regional Board is absolutely accurate. They have done that. With respect to scoping the systems beneath the prison facility, they have been engaged in a multi-month, very intensive investigation of any potential leaks of their system. That was also under our direction, and we are still engaged in settlement negotiations with Mule Creek State Prison on the amount of penalties that they will pay for the water quality violations that have occurred in years past. So I do want to make it absolutely clear to the board that all the issues being raised here are being addressed. They are all on my priorities list and are being handled with all due care. I will say with respect to the Mule Creek State Prison negotiations, when the State Water Board asked Andrew Altivo to come over to them, the one condition was I need him in the office for a few days a month to work on a few enforcement cases, and Mule Creek State Prison was one of those. And of course they relented, and so he's still working on that. We're working as a team to make sure that we have something equitable, but also that is tough for Mule Creek State Prison to comply with.
And so I can understand why when there's not a lot of activity that's visible, it might not look like there's activity happening. But on this particular issue, because I do remember Ms. Barron from the February meeting, is there a place where members of the public like Ms. Barron or concerned citizens like her can go and get a status update on what this is happening, or is there a particular staff member where they can contact? Because I know that it's quite a drive, and if she had information, maybe she could help disseminate it.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we have contact information for every agenda item that we have. We post the staff person and their phone number and contact information so that they are free to contact them. We've made the commitment to respond to those emails, and we do. We get back to the public as quickly as possible and route that information. Whether it's a complaint, whether it's a question, we try and get all that information out as expeditiously as possible.
And a couple of agenda items, agenda item 6 is the executive officer's report. It contains an awful lot of detail. I'm sure it doesn't have everything you do. If not, if it did, we would need a truck to bring it into the room, but it's, regardless.
We're trying to go paperless, so maybe a few
Yeah.
CDs.
Down the road, maybe we can do that, but it's certainly very exhaustive summary of what we're doing. So for the public, that's also another source, the executive officer report, and it's online.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the only problem is, if they wanted to find out what's happened the past few months, it just went online recently, so you'd have to look around a board meeting to see when the last one is.
Our front office staff is also very, very adept at routing calls to the people that need to receive them.
Right.
So we've got our front office phone number and email is plastered all over the board's website, all of our information materials. And calling that number, you get somebody who cares. And you get Margie and some of the other folks and who work that front desk, they are very committed to making sure that whoever calls gets connected with the people who can provide them answers.
All right.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor.
We'll move on to.
Carl?
Yes.
I just wanted to comment on the integrity, hard work, very long hours of our career bureaucrats and our staff and clerical help and all the members of the regional board. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for that, Bob. That's career bureaucrats get accused of a lot, and another one that's been heaped on is Robert Mueller. And
That doesn't mean that I always agree with them.
No, but they can be honest and would not agree with them. There's honest differences of opinion. Agenda item number 5 is an update by State Board member Dee Dee D'Amato. Dee Dee, please.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I am standing in for your State Board Liaison Board Member Tam Doda because she wasn't able to be here today. And we are trying something a little different. When we are not able as board members to attend a regional board meeting to which we are liaison, we have alternates. And so I requested to be alternate to Region 5. I love hanging out with Region 5, spent a lot of time with many of you. And so I'm an alternate, and Laurel Firestone is also an alternate. So hopefully, we can't promise that you will always have a board member here at your meetings, but we're trying to be better about our participation and engagement. And so I will update you on, I'm not quite sure if Board Member Dodek already updated you on some of these items, so there might be a little bit of a repeat. So first of all, we are interested in spending a little bit more time as a board traveling throughout the state. And so in March, we actually attended 2 meetings outside of our area. And so on March and May, on March 18th, we participated in a border tour arranged by Region 9. And then the following day, we held a board meeting in the Salton Sea region over at Region 7. And it was just a great opportunity here to hear from the local community regarding their interests and concerns about the Salton Sea Restoration Plan. Usually we hold these meetings in Sacramento, and it is quite a hardship for the community members to take the long trip to Sacramento. So the meeting was very well attended, good dialogue, and I think that we're finally starting to see some progress on that project. And then, as was indicated in May, at our board meeting, we held a meeting in Reading, and we used that as an opportunity both to do the tours that were already talked about, the Carr Fire, and also Iron Mountain Mine. I too, Board Member Snyder, learned a lot that day, and I was just privileged to be able to stand next to you during part of that tour and hear your perspective and the long history. I was very much surprised. I had no idea all that is involved in maintaining and protecting water quality at these sites. At one time, I understand as much as 5 to 6 tons per day were being discharged into the Sacramento River. And so if you look at some of the actions that we're trying to take now, obviously we've come a long, long way, but still have a long way to go. And really appreciate Board Member Markham, Schneider, and Chair Longley, your participation, and of course the executive officer and the team. Good participation from the board, and we always know your board to be very active, and so we just appreciate that you were there with us that day. On April 2nd, as was mentioned, on the wetlands or the waters of the U.S., those issues, our board had been working on a state policy for wetlands, for dredge and fill materials, procedures, and a definition of wetland. This goes back to 2008, long before my time on the board. And so it was just a real challenge to get this across the finish line. But I do appreciate that in the final days, like about a month or two before adoption, we tried something a little different because we could see that there were still a lot of concerns by many stakeholders of all different opinions. They just felt that we hadn't quite hit the mark. We also were hearing from some of the regional boards, and so we took the time to do, as a board, to do intensive, we've had done the stakeholder workshops and staff workshops, but we indicated that we were really serious about trying to get input from all parties and getting closer to a balance. And I think that when we adopted, it was obvious that we didn't make everybody happy, but it was sort of the 80% rule. Stakeholders were very pleased with the effort and just us putting some additional time to get closer. And so at this point, we did direct our staff to be really focused on implementation. The procedures do not take effect immediately. I think it's 9 months after approval by the Office of Administrative Law. And so we want to make sure that we get this right, and we have asked our staff to report back to us on the progress with implementation. So we'll want to stay real close to your staff and keep track of this as we move forward. And then kind of learning from that exercise, I'm hoping that we're going to do something similar on the winery general order. We have an administrative draft that we've been working with some of the stakeholders on, and regional boards have provided their input. But over the last several months, we've spent quite a bit of time hosting, well, not hosting, but the Wine Institute hosted several tours, and on those tours, the regional boards participated, and then we also held several outreach meetings, or our staff did. And so we heard a lot of really good ideas on the ground, and I think it became much more evident to us that we always say there's no one size that fits all, but it became, very obvious as we're out in the regions. This region does have some of the largest winery and other large facilities, but, we were in Region 1, Region 2, and Region 3 and got a better sense of what's going on there. So again, we're hoping to have a robust process going forward and trying to find something that works for all regions. The idea here is for us to have consistency amongst the regions, but also provide flexibility so that there can be, we can take into account some of the regional differences.
I find that order to be a pretty good order, and it does allow for exceptions. They have to be requested, and one of the kind of unique exceptions that was mentioned was in the Napa area. Some of the wineries need an exception so they can discharge human waste, because campers come into these. In the Napa area, there's a lot of tourists, a heck of a lot of tourists, and there are wineries that make tourism a big feature. And we don't have that issue in this region. As you pointed out, we've got some of the bigger wineries. But it's a good order, and I commend you folks for the work that you've been able to do with that to move it down the road.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we've got to protect water quality, but if we can do it in such a way that it's cost-effective and provides for flexibility for these different facilities, then that's a goal that I think we can all strive for. And then toxicity. I know Board Member Dodek has talked about this many times, so we're getting closer. We'll have another workshop, and we'll also attempt to have, more robust additional opportunities for stakeholders and for the regional boards as we close out on toxicity. And then, of course, it was already mentioned, CV Salt's workshop, July 2nd. I know this is a big priority for this board, and we just appreciate all that, your time and effort that was invested in this. Our board has been following it, through the annual reports. We get informational items, but now it's time to really drill down and better understand it. Plus, we have some new board members, and so I think this workshop is going to be a good opportunity for you all to come in and for the stakeholders that have worked with you on the development, hear some of the ongoing concerns, and better educate us. And so I really look forward to that opportunity. I've spent time at CV Salt's meetings, and I always go away better educated and also realizing how much I don't know. So I think it's important for us as a board to take the time on that.
Well, I want to thank you folks for inviting our staff in for multiple briefings, quite frankly. I've been very impressed by the briefings of not only the interest, but the depth of understanding that board members are gaining in this as before they get to the point they have to make a decision.
Yep, exactly. Well, it's a real opportunity for us. We've got to make sure we get it right. And of course, one of the goals here is, water quality, but also safe drinking water. And so I'd like to report, as you all know, this is a top priority for Governor Newsom, and before that, Governor Brown, and we're getting awfully close to a solution. It's, we're pretty hopeful that the legislature is going to act on this, and, with the budget deadline coming up, hopefully we'll see soon. But, there's many, we need many tools in the toolbox. So whether it's CV Salts, Consolidation Authority, funding, and of course, safe drinking water. The priority is safe drinking water. We're also working on a report on affordability, which would come next. But the priority right now is just making sure that communities are receiving safe drinking water. On April 29th, the governor issued an executive order, the Water Resilience Portfolio, and calling upon our agency at Cal APA, Resources Agency, and the Department of Food and Agriculture to build a climate resilient water system and to identify and assess a suite of complementary actions and to take an inventory and make recommendations going forward. We all know about the Water Action Plan. This really builds on the Water Action Plan and takes it further. Chair Esquivel is very much committed on getting regional board input on this. And so you'll be hearing soon that we're wanting to have your participation, and I'm not sure exactly in what form that'll be, whether we hear directly from the executive officers or if we come before you and at your regional board meeting. So stay tuned on that. We're looking forward to receiving input from all of the regions on that as we go forward. And then the last thing I wanted to update you on is the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. As you know, our board adopted that plan for the San Joaquin Phase 1 in December. It was a very controversial decision, but going forward on implementation, we also included a provision when we adopted Phase 1. We included a resolution item that directed our staff to work with the Resources Agency on a package that we could receive for Phase 2, which is the Sacramento, and potentially also for the San Joaquin on an alternative approach, which is called voluntary agreements. And those voluntary agreements would be a package of flow and non-flow measures that our board would be considering as compared to sort of a traditional regulatory approach. So as you know, we have the authority on flow. That's the one lever that we have. But we don't, it's an inartful system that we have. We do not have the authority to order water districts to commit to restoration projects, nor do we have the authority to order that they fund those restoration projects. We all talk about adaptive science, but we don't have the authority to require these irrigation districts and water districts to participate in an adaptive management governance type structure. And so the real beauty about these voluntary agreements is that the entities that would be subject to our order would be presenting as an alternative that they would commit to flow, a certain amount of flow, not as much flow as under the regulatory approach, but they would also be committing to a suite of actions and potentially stipulating to our authority to enforce under CDO. And so it's just very, let's just say, hopeful right now. So we do have some deadlines coming up that we've received voluntary agreements from within 9 watersheds. And in concept only, we received those in March and actually in December. And then in March, we received additional information. And now we're kind of going one by one and going through those agreements to, at this point, just ask some questions to make sure we have all of the correct information and we understand sort of the operational criteria and all that goes into them. And then we will be, as we move forward with additional information from the entities, we'll start the process of comparing sort of this voluntary approach compared to a regulatory approach. And then I expect that our board will be acting after we have a full package. So stay tuned on that. This is something I've been spending a lot of my time on, and I'm really excited about the potential opportunity that it presents.
And I'd like to comment on that. That's, the Bay Delta Plan was something that was very talked about and discussed in the area of California that I live in. And one of the concerns that I had heard was, trust with the staff at the state board, and can we trust them? And I'll tell you that the sentiment at the beginning was that they didn't, or that the connection wasn't there. But over time and the discussions has really started to thaw out that sort of confrontational path that they expected it. And it's more cooperative. So I appreciate that the state board is taking into consideration that maybe the people who are, closer and live it might have a way where we can both get maybe the goal of both of us, but maybe not in the same way. Like you said, there's more fine tuning that can be done. So I appreciate the state board's openness to considering those voluntary proposals.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your comments. So I have to say, our vote was 4-1. I voted against it. But I do see the value in our action because I think it got everyone to the table. People are very serious about looking at different approaches. And so I think that resolution, us as a board, and I did support that aspect of it because I thought that it was important for us to take a look at these other approaches. It's something that our board has been very serious about, and our staff is working very closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, with the Resources Agency, the Department of Water Resources, the Bureau of Reclamation. There were 42 entities that signed a letter that's of submittal in that package that we received in March. That included some NGOs, so some environmental organizations. So we're really looking for centrist solutions to some of these very challenging and complex problems.
I'd like to go back just a moment on the early action plans. Just for clarity, the early action plans we got a lot of communities, small communities, typically disadvantaged communities out there that don't have safe drinking water. And these are designed to get safe drinking water to these communities. Most times it's not safe drinking water at the tap. It's a source of safe drinking water, whether that be a kiosk or bottled water that is delivered. So that's one part of the package. The other part, as we move forward, that I talked about earlier in my comments, was the this effort which is underway by Division of Drinking Water right now to find solutions for area-wide provisions of drinking water that will provide affordable drinking water for people at their taps. And so these are two very related, two very important attributes of the overall program, but they do accomplish their means a little bit differently.
Yes.
And the heavy lifting is really on the second part of that. How do we put in water systems that can be sustainable over time and provide affordable water?
Addressing the operations and
That's
maintenance
right.
challenge
The
and
O&M
others.
issues are the
Yes.
big issues.
Yes, agreed. Okay.
Dee Dee, I very much want to thank you for coming by. I think the regional board is very lucky to have a number of state water board members that are engaged and you know, I think we felt privileged that we saw three, you know, a main one with two alternates to come by. And
We were fighting over this region.
and I'm sure it's not just because we have free parking out in Rancho Cordova, but very, very much appreciate the insight that you provide. I think it's refreshing to hear the perspective of different state board members. And with respect to policies like toxicity, like the winery order, and like the wetlands policy, I know this board in the past has been frustrated with state board policymaking and kind of the comment being, well, you say engagement with stakeholders, engagement with regional boards, but sometimes that in years past has felt like lip service. I will say to this board, particularly with respect to the wetlands policy and the recent policies, under the direction of Dee Dee and other state board members, they absolutely are listening and trying to find creative solutions that take into account the perspectives of the different regions. There was a lot of late in the afternoon into the evening and late night emails back and forth in the days that state board was trying to bring that wetlands policy home. I think they found a way to accommodate nearly all of the requests from the different regions to accommodate their different regulatory perspectives. I would add my name to the list of the folks who were participating in those communications and who felt at the end of the day that I was listened to, that our regional board's perspective was incorporated into that policy, and that we really had a workable solution that was hammered out in very short order as you know, everything kind of comes to a head as the final vote nears. But it was messy. I think these processes kind of have to be messy if you're gonna do that type of engagement. But we've seen an increased willingness in executive management at the state board to engage in that type of process and to go into those uncomfortable areas and have those conversations. So I really want to thank you for your leadership in kind of making that your staff and your executive management have that commitment to engagement and to trying to find that 80% threshold for everybody who's participating.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me because it's one thing to say that you want more collaboration and quite another to figure out how to get there. And so I think we as a board have been committed to this, and I think that, you know, we're evolving and we're learning as we move forward. And I just want to extend the compliment back to you. I've been in many meetings with you and Chair Longley, where it's obvious that you don't want to just be listened to, you want to listen to others. And so not only do we need to take into account this region, but I think it's just the other day being on a call on the winery order and hearing you wanting to better understand the concerns of other regions. And then, you know, only through that dialogue can you open up potential solutions that maybe none of us were aware of. So thank you very much.
And thank you for your very important and effective leadership also. I'd like to add my voice to that.
Okay, thanks.
We're ready to move on to the executive officer's report. Are there any comments?
This is a little detail. It's on page 21. It says starting on the part at the end of the third line, well, the unnamed seasonal creek and drainage course prior to discharging into Cache Creek, which drains into Clear Lake. And Cache Creek actually drains downstream into Yolo County. However, in flood situations, It actually can run uphill in at drain, so there are temporal times when it does drain into Clear Lake, but normally not.
I love that comment. You know, as somebody who used to live in Davis and kind of studied that system very, you know, from a non-technical perspective, I absolutely appreciate that perspective. I will say, and this is something I'll repeat tomorrow for the benefit of Board Member Kadara, and I think you mentioned it as well, Board Member Schneider. The request was to more explicitly call out the engagement that we make with disadvantaged communities and environmental justice communities. We've did that a little bit in this report. You'll notice there's a separate section in there. It's largely spearheaded by Robert LaRue, who in this office is kind of tasked with a lot of that level of engagement. But we're working, you know, just for your information, we're working on having better reporting tools for all staff to use, perhaps even, you know, some sort of standardized form, standardized online form would be ideal that they can fill out after having those types of community engagement, so that we can figure out how to best categorize them and how to best report those to the board. I think, you know, some folks are, you know, the business rules by which the engagement is made and the engagement is reported is a little different from office to office. So we're working on standardizing that and working on making sure that we can tell the board exactly how we're interacting with the community, that we protect their water. So I think they deserve to know how we're engaging with them. So, you know, that effort's ongoing. I think you'll see additional refinements. The EO report got longer this month. I've been trying to slim it down, but the ADA compliance rules, we're doing it in 12-point font now, so that's why it got longer. Despite my best efforts, it crept a little bigger. So makes it a little easier for tired eyes to read. That's kind of one of the benefits of that. But any questions, feel free to direct them to me, and I'll figure out how to get them resolved.
Thank you. Any further comments?
I really like the public outreach is just short and sweet, and I can just look for exactly what I'm looking for, so I really like that.
Yeah, and we're trying to make sure that all the engagement that we have, I think there's still some members of staff that, you know, they engage and they, you know, on one hand, yeah, it's absolutely part of your job. On the other hand, hey, let's write it up and let the board know about it. And so I have a sense that there's even additional public engagement that staff might not think of as public engagement, more as just doing their job. But we want to make sure that that's daylighted as well.
I was also impressed with, in your report too, the employee recognition for some of the good data organization that's particularly our newer staff are doing to get a handle on all of this technical data, so that you know, it can be analyzed and properly
Absolutely.
Dealt with to regulate things over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, you know, there's data and there's information. and I think we've got a lot of staff that are committed to making sure that data aren't just floating out there in the ether, and that they're put in a usable format for the regulators. And I do have a number of employee awards. I don't know.
Before we do that,
Do that first. Okay.
we have another award that we need to give. John Constantino, could you meet me at the podium, please? This is pretty difficult to do, John, because there's a lot of hassle over this. So many embarrassing things happened around you. And I had a real problem up here with Carmen. She wanted to put all kinds of stuff in here. Some of it's in here, but we took most of it out.
Well, the stuff that didn't make the cut, I have up here for later.
So this is a resolution commending John M. Constantino for his service as a member of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. whereas John Constantino was appointed to the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region in 2011 by Governor Jerry Brown, and whereas John Constantino was reappointed to the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region in November 2015 by Governor Jerry Brown, and whereas John's technical and policy-making experience provided the board with direction and insights in its decisions on a wide variety of issues, and whereas John's balanced approach to and dedication to environmental protection provided valuable input to fellow board members and board staff, and whereas John was able to mix in both carbon dioxide and water without spraying sparkling water all over the dais, and whereas John worked closely with staff on issues of climate change, including the board's 2017 climate change resolution and work plan, whereas during John's tenure on the board, he participated in significant permitting, planning, and enforcement decisions, including decisions regarding the Central Valley Water Board's Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, the general waste discharge requirements, numerous administrative civil liabilities orders, and numerous MPDS non-15 and Title 27 permits. And whereas John's evaluations, recommendations, and willingness to express his honest opinions were highly valued by the board members and the executive officer, and certainly his input will and is being missed. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region, in meeting assembled, do hereby extend to John Constantino their thanks and appreciation for his valued service as a board member, and wish him and his family well in future endeavors. Signed by myself, Carl Longley, Chair. Unanimously adopted this 6th day of June 2019, the 563rd regular meeting of the California Regional Water Board, Central Valley Region, and everybody, for some reason, voted yes on that. And we want to thank you very much for your service, and that wasn't too bad, was it? No, that was fine. So, John, I'd like to present this to you. Thank you. Great.
Wait, get another one, I was in the back.
Over here. We got to do this in front of. You know about that.
And John, thank you for all your work, and I particularly want to underscore again the climate change work that you did for this board and the strategic planning that went into that and through all of our programs. I think that's an incredibly significant accomplishment. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the two whereases that didn't make it in.
Uh-oh.
It says, whereas John kept Carmen entertained and complimented Carmen's excellent sketching skills through the breaks of the meeting. And whereas John almost gave his life in service to the board when he almost fell off Iron Mountain during one of our tours. Those are the two that didn't make it there, John. But you were greatly missed. I mean, you were my neighbor for lots of years, and I learned so much being next to you. And now, even though I don't see you regularly, I appreciate our friendship, and I hope that it continues on.
Thank you. And I just want to say thanks to everybody, the executive office, executive officers, people I worked with before I got to the water board. I appreciate the note about friendship. Bob, even though we sort of went back and forth on a number of items, your service to the board and your knowledge has been incredible, and I really appreciate that. And Carl, actually, it's hard to say what's going to happen when you're on this side of the receiving this, because you've been here for so long and been part of it's going to be 5 pages and long of all the things that are adopted when you were here. 7 years, it's a long time, and I just want to say that all the interesting things that we talk about and go through, are going to make me a better Californian and a better citizen, and And I really appreciate the process, and the lady that came up here and spoke, that, you know, you gave her your full attention. And that's one of the things that, even though this is a state agency, it feels more like a local body in a lot of ways. And I always appreciated that. So I enjoyed serving. I miss the people. I miss the policies. And you'll see me around again and again.
Thank you, John. And your service in the water field is an opportunity for you to dip your toes in water for once, it seems, because you had quite a long and very highly commendable tour of duty, so to speak, on the Air Board, responsible in large part for Title 22, which is a unbelievably important action taken by the Air Board. Certainly your contributions to the environment now, both in water and air, are, I think, legend.
Thank you. You guys have a great day and meeting, and you'll see me around.
Thank you.
You're welcome to stay.
And we now have presentation of employee recognition awards by the executive officer.
Let me first begin with Denise Soria. Denise is receiving this award because she's a valued member of our non-15 waste discharge requirements permit writing unit in the Fresno office. Denise has a willingness to take on the workload of new projects with a positive attitude, and her experience allows her to be efficient and prioritize issues encountered on a project. Denise has demonstrated her skill set for the entire permitting process, from the receipt and review of a permit application, conducting pre-permit site inspections to visualize all aspects of the discharge proposed by the discharger, identifying issues and getting them resolved early on in the process, drafting a permit for discharger and public review and comment, and presenting the permit for board consideration. Specifically, tasks in addition to the permitting process that Denise has completed recently include dealing with a complicated project of 2 facilities combining their discharges into 1 pond. Denise inspected the facilities, drafted a monitoring and reporting program, and a 13260 letter for the submittal of a report of waste discharge. Prepared a notice of applicability for a small domestic wastewater treatment facility to be regulated under the statewide general waste discharge requirements for these types of facilities. Responded to multiple inquiries from dischargers about annual fee invoices, requirements for Title 22 engineering reports, and other technical questions. Drafted a memo and letter to a discharger after reviewing 14 technical reports for their discharge. She also assisted the disadvantaged community with questions about addressing their cease and desist order. Denise is a reliable and professional member out in our Fresno office and is very deserving of this award. And I will say, kind of from personal experience looking at the waste discharge requirements that Denise has worked with, the WDR program, if you look at the NPDES program, they've got a permit writer's manual that's about this thick, regulations that are about this thick. And for the non-15 program, there's no such guidance manual, there's no such regulations, it's just a few paragraphs, which means that a lot of the responsibility rests on our line staff and our engineers to come up with the appropriate wastewater solutions for those types of facilities based on a report of waste discharge. I know from working on waste discharge requirements with Denise that she is always very astute at picking out what are the important issues to deal with, what are the things I have to look out for, and where are the lines I have to draw to make sure that the board has an enforceable permit. So I absolutely congratulate Denise on this award. It is well deserved.
I'm sorry, I can't help wondering if you're volunteering her for writing a manual on waste discharge requirement.
It's an award, not a punishment. And we'll get pictures with the board at the end. Does that work for you? Next up is Jason. I saw you here. All right. Jason Schrader is an engineering geologist in the Reading office's groundwater unit and is being recognized for his outstanding work performance on underground storage tank and site cleanup program cases. Jason joined the Central Valley Water Board 2 years ago, bringing with him more than 9 years of experience working as an environmental consultant. Since joining the groundwater unit, Jason has applied his excellent technical and communication skills with a tenacity that has resulted in renewed movement on several stalled and challenging cases. The Allied Washoe petroleum release case, and you may recall that hearing from not too long ago, was one of Jason's initial focus areas after joining the Water Board. The unaddressed impacts from this site have affected Quincy's sewer system and required shutting down a municipal supply well. After his efforts to work with the discharger to implement the cleanup and abatement order requirements did not produce results, he pressed forward with the enforcement process and presented an administrative civil liability order at the February board meeting. The board adopted the administrative civil liability order with a penalty in excess of $660,000. Jason is continuing to work with the discharger on the necessary cleanup activities. A team player and a valued colleague, Jason is always willing to pitch in when needed. Over the past year, he has been a part of the Reading Emergency Response Team and has worked on the Reading office's car fire response by assessing residential properties and conducting surface water sampling. In addition, Jason was integral to the initial response to the 123 trichloropropane contamination detected in a school drinking water well in Gridley. His innovative approach to gathering information on this project is now being applied to sites elsewhere in the Central Valley region. Jason's management team is very pleased to nominate him for this much-deserved Superior Accomplishment Award, and I will say the feedback that I've gotten from Clint and the management team over at the Reading office is that Jason is an absolute rock star and has dived into all the programs that he's been assigned to and really seen them with a fresh set of new eyes. I appreciate the work that he presented to the board with the Allied Washoe case and really appreciate all the work that you do.
That definition of kind of has a different meaning for him. A rock star to a geologist. That's,
Next up is Alicia. We didn't do quite as many awards in the Fresno, so we're making up for lost time here. Alicia Wenzel is being recognized for her accomplishments in organizing and implementing critical sampling in the aftermath of the Camp Fire. She is also being recognized for her role in the development of E. coli monitoring and a source tracking plan for the Lower American River that you'll hear about later on this board meeting. In a limited period of time, Alicia determined the funding and developed a sampling protocols for the watershed affected by the Camp Fire. Alicia also organized the sampling crews and ensured that all monitoring was conducted per required protocols. Her key coordinating role enabled the collection of high-quality data for constituents potentially affecting the watershed that our agency, other government agencies, and the general public has relied upon to better understand the impacts of the fire. One specific example of where Alicia's determination kept the program on track is where sampling filters began plugging up with suspended material. Alicia determined the only way to get the samples filtered was to drive them to a laboratory miles away in the Bay Area. She immediately boarded the trusty Chevy pickup that Swamp staff used and drove the samples to the Bay Area for filtration and analysis. Without this filtration step, data quality would have been impaired, and the board would not have gotten the information that it needed. Alicia is also filling a key technical role in the development of the E. coli sampling and a source tracking work plan for the Lower American River. She has helped to organize stakeholder meetings and has provided important technical feedback on highly technical E. coli source tracking techniques in a complex watershed with numerous potential sources. Also a lot of contentious stakeholders, I'd add. She also worked with staff to collect weekly E. coli samples in the Lower American River over the last year. This data set is being used as a key component to inform the source tracking work plan. Alicia is a conscientious, hardworking, and has provided a useful, a positive, and cheerful nature. She is well deserving of this award, and I will absolutely second that. I know Alicia has on one hand has a very calm personality, but that belies a lot of leadership that she's exhibited in all the projects that she's worked on. A tenacious scientist here. I really appreciate a geologist here. I appreciate all the work that you've been doing. You know, the Lower American River obviously is an issue that all the board members hear about in their confirmation hearings. There's possibly no more staff that has been more connected to informing swimmers of the risks posed by E. coli than Alicia on our staff. So I really commend her for all her work. Congratulations.
Did I hear a mention of geologist?
She's an engineering geologist, absolutely.
It is, I have said this, I don't know if it's true, but I think the Central Valley Water Board is one of the largest employers of geologists in the Central Valley, so.
I think that's accurate. Steve.
And they're all rock stars.
Steve Thompson began working at the Central Valley Water Board's Rancho Cordova office in 2010 and serves as the region's personnel liaison. Steve plays an important role for our region and acts as a liaison between our employees and the State Board's HR branch, ensuring smooth communication and prompt resolution of all human resources and payroll-related functions. Steve coordinates the process of reviewing and preparing various personnel documents, including, but not limited to, the development of duty statements, job announcements, and requests for personnel action. And if you haven't been involved in the state hiring process, it is incredible the amount of knowledge and detail-oriented work that needs to go into those, and Steve has always been able to provide those documents very quickly and very efficiently. Steve supports approximately 140 positions in the Rancho Cordova office and provides consistent and prompt responses to a wide variety of HR questions involving payroll, benefits, new hire paperwork, and the state's hiring process. Steve works diligently to ensure successful completion of all tasks and provides outstanding responsiveness and promptness given the volume of HR-related transactions that cross his desk. On average, Steve processes 250 RPAs per fiscal year while constantly providing consistent, high-quality direction and beneficial wisdom with a positive and professional attitude. Steve was also an integral part of the State Board's recent HR consolidation project, which supported our agency's effort to achieve consistency and compliance with all applicable HR laws, rules, and regulation. Steve models the highest level of customer service, work ethic, and a calm and steady demeanor, and is a tremendous asset to our region as personnel liaison. For these reasons, Steve is deserving of this award, and I gotta say, I reluctantly present this award only because Steve's retirement is imminent, and I don't know how we're going to replace those type of that type of assets in this office. Steve has been a wonderful resource for me as I've experienced with a lot of water quality policy work, the HR stuff. Steve is one of the go-to folks that I go to figure out what the heck's going on with all these acronyms that are being thrown at me. So thank you so much. Congratulations, Steve. Oh. And let's get a couple photographs for the board.
We're going to move agenda item 8 ahead of agenda item 7 at the request of Adam Lavitz. Thank you. This is a resolution for U.S. Army Corps of Engineer MOU maintenance dredging. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider a resolution approving the executive officer to enter into a memorandum of understanding concerning maintenance dredging operations within the Sacramento and Stockton Deep Watership Channel. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence and testimony on this matter? Seeing no one, this matter will proceed based on the agenda materials
Dr.
and the
Longley?
record.
My suggestion is staff have a very short presentation on this. It's a matter that the board hasn't heard much about. It is a fairly significant issue. We've done a lot of work on this one. If you can spare 5 minutes for a very quick
We can.
presentation.
We'll take the briefing.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Nicholas White. I'm an engineer here, the 401 Water Quality Certification and Dredging Unit. I've taken the oath, and this presentation is, as the chairman stated, regarding the pending resolution to authorize the executive officer to enter into a memorandum of understanding between the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board for maintenance dredging activities within the Sacramento and Stockton Deep Watership channels. So a quick overview of what I plan to discuss in this presentation. I'm going to overview the Stockton and Sacramento Deep Watership channels, give you a brief overview of the dredging operations that are conducted or will be conducted under this Memorandum of Understanding, another overview of our current regulatory orders, and then I'll dive into the long-term MOU provisions, and then we'll wrap it up with staff recommendations. So, as I promised, here we have the Stockton Deep Watership Channel. It was authorized by Congress in 1876 and has been maintained by the Corps since. The Deep Watership Channel here extends from the port of Stockton all the way to just west of Antioch. The Stockton Channel allows the port of Stockton to accept 5 million tons of commercial tonnage each year, taking more than 1 million trucks off of area roads annually. Here we have the Sacramento Deep Watership Channel. This one was built in 1963 with a depth of approximately 30 feet, 200 feet wide, and extending 43 miles from the port of West Sacramento south down just west of Antioch again. The port of West Sacramento relies on the Sacramento Deep Watership Channel to support 1 million tons of commercial goods, and the only U.S. Coast Guard station in the California Bay Delta is located on this channel. Okay, so the deep watership dredging operations. The maintenance dredging activities include suction dredging of the channels to a maintenance depth of 30 feet. So that's dredging down to 30 feet and just there. Placing the dredged slurry material to designated sites, which are called dredge material placement sites, and that's shown there in the picture for you. Monitoring these placement sites to ensure the lack of potential nuisance conditions such as odors or mosquito breeding habitat, and monitoring their capacity to receive additional material. Finally, the operations involve the release of the decant water back to surface water. The decant water, this is water that's been confined to the placement sites for a duration of time and has allowed the suspended solids to settle out, and then the water from the top is subsequently released back to the surface water by a pump, weir, or outfall pipe. Then the remaining sediment, which you can kind of see there at the front of the image, which is mostly sandy, fine-grained material, remaining at the placement sites is then available for beneficial reuse offsite. I'd like to reiterate that this is an annual operation to maintain the designated depth of these channels, and the sediment being removed essentially accumulated within the past year or since the last maintenance activity. So this isn't older sediment at the very depths of the channel, but rather the top sediment that's just being accumulated each year. Okay, so what is suction dredging? This is the method that the maintenance operations use, and this is a diagram here provided for you with a photo of the actual dredge unit from the field shown below. The section highlighted here in red is the pathway that's fully contained that transports the dredge slurry from the cutter head unit through the onboard pump and then out the discharge pipe. The onboard pumps provide suction to the cutter head, and then the cutter head acts like a vacuum, basically, sucking up sediment from the channel bottom, which has very minimal localized impacts because of the vacuum action. And then the sediment is disturbed by the cutter head and then piped directly to the placement site. So going through the pipeline, it's contained and goes directly to the placement site to avoid mobilizing sediment throughout the water column. So it's just the localized impacts at the cutter head and then at the placement site. The spuds that are located at the back of the dredging unit allow the operator to maneuver the dredge unit itself, alternating the spuds kind of like feet to anchor the dredge unit in a fixed point while it's dredging and then to allow it to move on to the next location. And then, as I said, the fully contained dredge slurry is transported by the pipeline to the discharge placement site. So in the past, we had 2 regulatory orders which were used to regulate maintenance dredging operations. One of them was for the Sacramento Deep Watership Channel, the other for the Stockton Deep Watership Channel. Monitoring data collected under these 2 general orders have indicated that dredging and disposal activities in these deep watership channels are not likely to create adverse conditions. Since the adoption of these orders, there has been slight disagreement between the Corps and the Central Valley Water Board regarding which permit requirements are applicable, and I'll get into that on the next slide. Because permit requirements for the federal government must implement the same water quality standards as permits issued to private and municipal entities, but other provisions such as enforcement and procedural exemptions need to be tailored specifically for the federal government. And the past general orders did not have that type of federal government specific language, and that was the crux of the Corps' objection. So last year, in 2018, the Corps and the Central Valley Water Board entered into a memorandum of understanding, an interim interim memorandum of understanding. This allowed the Corps to complete their 2018 dredging operation without interference, while a more long-term agreement could be negotiated. The monitoring data collected under the interim MOU continued to indicate the minimal impacts associated with the dredging and disposal activities, and this data, in combination with the past data collected under general orders, were considered when negotiating and developing provisions for the long-term agreement. This fully negotiated long-term agreement is the pending tentative MOU before you today. This MOU is designed to bypass the disagreement and provide the board with water quality information needed to ensure protection of beneficial uses while we continue to work on a long-term regulatory approach for these actions. So, provisions in the long-term MOU include updated monitoring at all 3 stages of the dredging operation. This includes the pre-dredge, the active dredging, and the post-dredge discharge to ensure that targeted sampling provides meaningful sample results representative of actual impacts. So prior to conducting dredge activities, a contribution will be made to the Delta Regional Monitoring Program annually in order to participate in improving the understanding of Delta water quality issues. Additionally, pre-dredge sediment sampling and analysis will occur every 5 years in order to characterize the channel sediment and confirm the applicability for beneficial reuse of that sediment. Under the past general orders, the pre-dredge sediment sampling was conducted annually with the purpose of characterizing the channel sediment in addition to simulating the future effluent from the disposal sites. However, we're implementing new effluent monitoring to be conducted at the dredge material placement discharge locations, and then that will replace the simulated effluent analysis and actually provide real data for what's entering the receiving water. Water Board staff has reviewed the past channel sediment characterizations and determined that a 5-year frequency is sufficient for characterizing this sediment, which has remained relatively consistent for more than a decade now. During active dredging, so where the dredge unit is in the channel, the receiving water is going to be monitored upstream and downstream of the dredge unit itself for general water quality parameters like dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, and turbidity. This will ensure that the operator's best management practices remain effective and that the impacts to the channel are limited. As I said, previous monitoring data collected at the dredge unit has shown limited impacts. After the dredge slurry is then pumped to the dredge material placement sites and suspended solids are allowed to settle out, the decant water, like I said, the clear water off the top, is discharged back into the receiving water. During the first 24 hours of this discharge from each site, a sample will be collected and analyzed for a full suite of constituents. As stated, this will replace that less precise simulated effluent analysis that would have been conducted prior to the dredging activity. To ensure that the discharge doesn't contribute to exceedance of water quality objectives in the receiving water, monitoring will also be conducted upstream and downstream of the discharge location. For general parameters, those will be monitored daily in the receiving water, while constituents of concerns that are identified by board staff will be conducted weekly, and we'll be using monitoring data from previous years to identify those constituents of concern. Overall, the tentative MOU before you today will ensure water quality objectives remain protected, and the board is provided with meaningful data to evaluate impacts associated with the maintenance dredging operations. The tentative resolution was released for a 30-day comment period, and no comments were received contesting the proposed resolution. Staff recommend that the board adopt the resolution to authorize the executive officer to enter into a 10-year memorandum of understanding between the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board for maintenance dredging activities within the Sacramento and Stockton deep watership channels. We would like to enter the agenda package and the case files for this resolution into the record. This concludes the presentation, and we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for board members?
I have a couple. I always wonder in the Delta, what you guys looked at in terms of if there were mercury and methylization of mercury through this process in any way or form.
Yeah, so under the TMDL for the Delta with the mercury, the Army Corps has in the past conducted methylmercury studies and provided us with meaningful reports and data regarding that. And we have included methylmercury and mercury monitoring in the effluent during the first 24 hours of discharge to ensure that we're not seeing any increased discharge of that constituent into the channel.
So we don't have any information that there's been an issue in the past?
They would be contained in reports that I'm not necessarily privy to.
That's not very helpful, is it? I have a couple other things. I think about this too in terms of building up Delta Island, and I'm wondering, would be helpful, but also, is there agriculture on top of these deposited sediments?
So, go ahead. I was going to respond to the.
Agriculture on top of these deposits, there's multiple discharge locations, dredge material placement sites, I should say, and each one is kind of different in its orientation. So the photograph that's shown here is one of the placement sites, which acts as a pasture for cattle. There's another one which is a wetland, and it has beneficial uses as that, and the discharge is being used to provide sand for the buildup of that wetland. I'm not sure that there's actually agriculture occurring.
I'm just looking, there are ancillary benefits that
Yes.
occur with this. So.
Absolutely.
It's interesting, you mentioned the ship channels start at Collinsville. And it's been a long time since I've been to Collinsville, and I don't know who else might have been there. It was actually a proposed site for a nuclear power plant that PG&E proposed many years ago. It was, I looked at this because it was kind of an interesting place, but originally when they subdivided this little property, they would for $10 you could buy a boat ride from San Francisco to go up and see your property, and they'd feed you lunch and then take you back to San Francisco. And I'm pretty sure they sold those lots many times over, each one.
Well, I was going to say everything that he said. Those are my exact concerns. So thanks for stealing my thunder. No, so I appreciate the work. I mean, this can't be an easy a resolution to prepare, given, the scope of the Army Corps and our concerns for the water. So I appreciate your time on this. As a practical matter, I know that they dredge once a year, but how many days is the dredging process to do it from where it begins to where it ends?
I believe the dredging operations in the past, or in 2018, occurred from August through November. And I think there were 2 or 3 dredge units that were working during that time, and they were able to get through most of the sites that they had scheduled for both Sacramento and the Stockton channels.
Yeah, I saw that there was 36 samples, so I felt about the right time, but just want to make sure. Okay, thank you.
So in regards to the methylmercury question, I'm not aware of these dredge material disposal sites being one of our larger sources of methylmercury coming into the Delta. We are concerned anytime you impound water in that way because it could lead to increased methylation of mercury. So that's why we have the monitoring in this memorandum of understanding. What we hope is that the placement of the materials and the beneficial reuse of the materials will, remove some of that material and have some upland placement, which will help with, the overall amount of mercury in the system. But we'll have more information, I think, as this unfolds too. And I do believe Janice is in the audience, and she has imminent knowledge of the mercury and the mercury issues within the Delta. So if you would like more information, I'm sure she could say a few things. And the other thing I would say is the Corps is here, and I'm sure they can answer specific questions on days of operation also.
Thank you, Adam, for those comments. Any further questions?
And thank you for being here, Dr. Cook.
Thank you. And in fact, Colonel Rayfield is here, and he filled out a card. And would you like to make comments, sir? I first met Colonel Rayfield when I accompanied Adam and Patrick and Pamela on a visit to his office as we were discussing these issues. And I want to thank the Corps for the cooperation that you have provided to this board as we've worked through this MOU.
I appreciate the board's time for letting us come in today. It was a great presentation, covered the majority of the facts, so I'll stay brief. I just wanted to be excited to come in and reciprocate. The board came to me in San Francisco in November of 2017 to lay out their concerns, and I really wanted to highlight members of your staff, specifically the Deputy XO and the gentleman to my left, Mr. White, who's done a fabulous job of making sure that we are communicating well. This process and this MOU crosses 2 district boundaries with Sacramento and San Francisco, and as the contracting agency, I'm here to represent that. So I just want to say we've had the authorities since the late 1800s on the Stockton Channel, since the 1946 on the Deep Watership Channel for Sacramento, and we've been doing active dredging operations since the 1930s and the 1960s here. And I really was excited to see our teams come together to say, how are we going to take the data that we've monitored and improve our operations for the future? So as learning organizations, really excited to have the opportunity to enter into an MOU for how we'll get better in the future. And so with the presentation that was given before, I just want to make those comments as a thank you to the board for giving us some time today. Do you have any questions for me?
What about wet years, dry years? How do the years differ?
It's highly variable, as you know. There's a heavy snow load this year, and that eventually will melt and come through the Sacramento system, and you would expect that to mobilize more material. And then in dry years, you have less material. So Mother Nature has a vote. Mother Nature has a big vote, and so that dictates how we operate. But I think you did a good job of answering. Generally speaking, that August-November timeframe is what we try to limit our operations to best reflect and respect the environment.
Any further questions?
I just wanted to comment, as you mentioned, you had the authority since 18-something. But another way of saying that is you've had the responsibility and you've done that well. So thank you very much for taking on that job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your service, sir. Thank you. With that said, are there any late revisions or staff comments?
No late revisions, no staff comments.
Very good. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No, Dr. Longley.
Thank you. The hearing's now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
And move to approve the resolution as presented.
Do I have a second?
I'll second
It's
it.
been moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Schneider? Dr. Markham?
Aye.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
And I would like to express my appreciation for Nick for standing up and giving the presentation when it wasn't absolutely required, just so that the board could be informed of this issue. It's a big one, and I think that the really Jim and Stephanie's team, Nick included, Bailey, as well as the Army Corps, really stepped forward and tried to be solution-oriented to work past the differences between our two organizations and get the information that we needed here. So I really commend them for their work on this project. I know I was with the Office of Chief Counsel when I was raising some of the issues and kind of debating some of the issues with the Army Corps. As we transitioned, I think we got all the objectives for water quality met, and we got it done in an amicable way. So thank you for that partnership. I would suggest if we could take a brief recess
We're going to
so that I
take a
can
recess
get this
until
MOU signed.
11 o'clock, about 13 minutes. Please be back here and in your seats ready to go at 11. Thank you. Let's come back into session, please.
I have to thank you for doing this item before lunch, not after lunch like last time. I was like,
What was that?
we talked about this one the last time, right after lunch, talking about human poop in the water, and I'm like, I can't do this like before lunch, not after lunch. So this is better.
Toxicity. That's pesticides and stuff like that. Oh, I'm missing, where is the
Here on numbers.
7? There we go. We're on agenda item 7, Lower American River E. coli monitoring. This time, the board will hear a presentation on E. coli monitoring and the development of a source tracking study for the Lower American River. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. After the staff presentation, interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board, and we'll now hear the staff presentation.
So good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Alicia Wenzel, and I'm an engineering geologist here in the Rancho Cordova office, working with the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, also known as SWAMP. And as Chair Longley said, I'll be providing an update on our E. coli monitoring in the Lower American River and the status update on a source tracking monitoring design. So I wanted to start with an overview of the Lower American River. So it's a 27-mile reach that flows from below Nimbus Dam over here on the right side of the map and flows to the west down to the confluence with the Sacramento River near downtown Sacramento, marked on the map. And for reference, I also, the gold star is where we're meeting right now here in Rancho Cordova. The dots on the map are some of our swamp monitoring stations that we've monitored over the years since 2007. So I wanted to point a couple of those out since they'll reappear in future slides. So our most upstream site is at the Lower Sunrise Recreation Area, just up the road. Some of the other sites, Paradise Beach is kind of a dispersed recreation area on this point of the river. Sutter's Landing is a City of Sacramento park. And then Discovery Park and Tuscarnia Park are very popular recreation areas. Tuscarnia Park has I think the most popular swimming beach on the American River. And I also wanted to point out this whole section of the river is part of the American River Parkway, so it has multi-use trails and other recreation facilities that are very actively used. So kind of the focus of our monitoring and this project is to assess whether recreational beneficial uses are being protected. More specifically, water contact recreation, or Rec 1, so which includes activities like swimming, wading, fishing, rafting, and kayaking, or activities that will bring people in contact with the water and where they might ingest some of that water. And our concern is if the water has pathogens that can cause illness. So how do we assess recreational uses? With current methodology and just the wide number of pathogens that can be in our water, it's not practical to monitor for individual pathogens. So the common practice is to use fecal indicator bacteria. So these are bacteria found in pet, wildlife, and human waste. And they indicate, of course, the presence of fecal pollution and that risk of illness and pathogens. So recently, the State Water Board adopted new bacteria water quality objectives to help us assess recreational uses. The objectives are based on US EPA's 2012 recreational water quality criteria. So you might have seen that reference in some of our older reports and documents. So the new objectives are consistent with those criteria. They're kind of based on an assumed gastrointestinal illness rate of 32 illnesses per 1,000 recreators. It's kind of important to understand. And what I have circled in red here is for our low salinity freshwaters. The indicator bacteria we use is E. coli, and there are kind of two parts to that objective. There's a geometric mean of 100 colony forming units per 100 milliliters of sample, and a statistical threshold value of 320 colony forming units per 100 milliliters. So you kind of see those numbers again as I go through the presentation. So looking more at our monitoring, so SWAMP has been monitoring the Lower American River since 2007 as part of a larger study.
Could
to
you
ass-
go back to the previous slide, please?
Yes.
Looking below that, the salinity is 1 part per thousand or 1,000 parts per million. It's less than that or equal, so that's fresh water basically. I noticed this one below where it's greater than 1,000 parts per thousand. It's interesting at the Intercoxy or your major one there, but where are you in counting salinities of that high in the river?
Oh, sorry, these are just for the objectives were adopted as part of the fresh, I'm sorry.
Oh, these are objectives
inland
pulled out,
surface-
a general
yeah,
objective.
sorry,
I'm
the
sorry.
inland surface
Go-
water plan.
Go
So there's-
ahead. That makes it,
Probably should have just left that lower part out, but, so it is out there for other water bodies with
very
higher
good.
salinity.
Understand. Thank you.
So just as a practical question.
Wait a
if
sec, now you
you're
got
already
me,
there-
now you got me confused.
Yeah, okay. Well, answer the science question first. Mine is practical.
Okay.
Are we talking about data, criteria that are in our basin plan or EPA criteria?
The table is the new objectives that were adopted by State Board.
State board adopts those statewide, so those basically apply statewide. The state board has the authority to adopt statewide objectives that override whatever we have in our basin plan. They want to standardize it statewide, so that's why you see ocean objectives basically in
So this is an extract and simply only the top one is applicable to our basin, is that correct?
That's
Or
correct.
To this area.
That's correct.
So if statewide adopts it, then it shows up in our basin plan after reviews?
It does not need to go through that extra step, that's the new statewide objective.
All right, my question is 32 illnesses per 1,000 recreators. What's the illness, right? Are they in the hospital? Are they,
So
what's going on?
this is based on studies that were mostly conducted by US EPA, where they monitored different types of indicator bacteria and then surveyed swimmers. And so it's more like stomach upset or anything that they would report.
Yeah, I think it is worth noting that. I mean, I think the bottom line is that standard is basically what you'd get if you jumped into a water body that's untouched by human beings. You'd still have a shot at getting sick because of the bacteria load that's in that water body. So that's kind of where, there's always going to be a bacterial load, whether it's from animals, or whether it's from humans. So that's why, it's not a 0 per 1,000. It's a 32 is kind of where the reasonable standard to be protective is.
Okay, I just want, because this is the practical sort of application that, I hear about.
And I think and the other part of that is, if we have levels above the 100 or 320, that doesn't mean that people will get sick. It's just that there's an increased risk of that because we don't know if there are actually pathogens present.
And what you said is very true, Patrick. Nature is not benign. Some years ago when I was on the East Coast involved in some water quality work, on the Chesapeake Bay, they came down, the authorities to be like us, I guess, in a sense, came down upon the waste, POTWs because of high concentrations of coliform in the Chesapeake Bay. Turns out it was migrating birds. So nature is not benign. We're interested in the human contribution.
Okay, any more questions? Sorry. Okay, so now looking at our monitoring. So as I was saying, so SWAMP has been monitoring in the Lower American River since 2007 as part of a larger region-wide study to assess protection of recreational beneficial uses. For that study, we did target swimming holes and beaches where people are likely to be in contact with the water and sampled primarily during the summer months. One of the ways that data has been used is as for the integrated report and the Clean Water Act Section 303D list of impaired water bodies. So a water body is listed as impaired when monitoring data exceeds water quality standards, such as those bacteria objectives. So in the combined 2014 and 2016 update to that list, the Lower American was listed as impaired due to indicator bacteria. And so since that time, a lot of our monitoring has kind of been focused on trying to better understand the extent of that problem and better document it. More recently, we've also been doing a lot of work to notify the public of current conditions in the river, and then also to inform efforts to develop a monitoring design to identify sources. So currently, our swamp staff have been out monitoring weekly at 9 sites on the Lower American River that I have marked on the map again here. So you'll see again the Lower Sunrise, Paradise Beach, and Discovery Park. You might notice that our stations are kind of clustered towards the bottom end of the river near the confluence with the Sacramento. And that's because historically we've seen more of our high elevated E. coli levels in that area. Something new that we added in 2018 were 2 sites on Steelhead Creek. So we have a site at the entrance to Discovery Park and also at the boat ramp in Discovery Park near the mouth of Steelhead Creek. So Steelhead Creek drains from North Sacramento and captures flow from Arcade Creek and Dry Creek that kind of go up to Roseville for those of you that are local. And it's been the focus of a lot of attention recently, including some trash and debris cleanups and restoration efforts. So we wanted to see what was going on there. And so one of the things we've done is we've actually created an online maps where we're sharing our results the day after we go out and sample so that they're available to the public and local agencies. So what I have here is just a screenshot of that map. I've kind of zoomed in on that lower end of the river near downtown Sacramento. And the colors on the map indicate the current E. coli results. So there are actually 3 different levels that we indicate. So in green are sites that are currently meeting the bacteria objectives. In yellow are sites, or there would be sites if we had any, where the average E. coli levels are above that geometric mean value of 100. And then in red are sites that are above the statistical threshold value of 320, the most recent results. So you can see both of our sites on Steelhead Creek as well as Tiscornia Beach are in red. And these results were collected on Tuesday and posted yesterday afternoon. And if you click on one of the sites, for instance, Tiscornia Beach, you'll get a pop-up window with more information. So you'll see we have a picture, the coordinates, a link to the park information, and then we actually list out the current results as well as results from the past 4 weeks. So this week, Tiscornia Beach was 325, so just above that statistical threshold value, but it's actually been pretty low before that for the last month. At the bottom of that pop-up window are a couple of links. One is to a summary table with all of our results going back to January of 2018, and then a link to those bacteria objectives for people that want to find out more information on that. Our website for this is not very memorable, but we do have links both from our Central Valley Water Board Swamp webpage, and the County Parks has posted a link on their page for the American River Parkway. And also here today, I have some handouts for people that have QR code links that will take you both to our website and directly to the American River results, if anyone wants to find out more about that. So then moving on, I think to the real focus of today, the source tracking monitoring design. So we have been working with local stakeholders for over a year now to kind of think about how we want to develop this monitoring design. I've listed some of the key stakeholders here, including Sacramento Regional Sanitation District, Sacramento County, and the City of Sacramento, but it's also included other groups like the larger Sacramento Stormwater Partnership and other interested groups. And kind of thinking about, identifying sources of fecal contamination, there's 2 kind of parts to that. One is just geographically figuring out where on the river do we have sources entering. And the other part is trying to figure out what type of sources there are. So that's figuring out if it's humans or dogs or geese or wildlife. And so the way we want to do that is using DNA bacterial markers. We're lucky that there's been a lot of advances in the science recently, and so we'll be able to do that. So in order to develop a framework, Sacramento Regional Sanitation District awarded a grant through their Confluence program to the San Francisco Estuary Institute, SFEI, and Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, SQUIRP, to provide leadership and expertise for that effort. So that a grant was awarded late last summer, and since then, they were able to host 3 stakeholder meetings to get input and feedback on the monitoring design. They also participated in a field tour so they could come up and see the Lower American River firsthand and what we're dealing with. And the result was a technical memo with some recommendations for us. And the main part of that is they're recommending a tiered approach to developing the monitoring design. This is based on the California Microbial Source Tracking Manual, which was funded by the State Water Board a number of years ago and actually developed by the experts at SCWRP. So I said there are 4 tiers. First, to collect observational data and compile a list of potential sources. Second, to analyze existing data to identify the times and locations of greatest concern. Third, sampling and analysis to fill data gaps and help narrow the list of possible sources. And fourth, to monitor the extent and magnitude of fecal sources. So those first 2 are kind of what we've been working on with SFEI and SCWRP over the past, 6 to 9 months. And the third and fourth bullets are really what's going to be part of that monitoring framework. So starting first, collecting data, kind of bend it into 3 groups. So first, geographic information, so GIS layers to help us understand where potential sources are along the river. So things like stormwater systems, sewer lines, where sanitary sewer overflows are occurring, as well as things like the locations of our monitoring locations, the stream network. And also I should have pointed out that the reach that we're interested in on the Lower American River, there are levees alongside the river, which do kind of restrict what can flow into the river, and it's important to consider. We're also collecting observational data, so that's talking to our field crews, park staff, and others who are out on the river, so they can report on where they see concentrations of things like geese or recreation areas where people are taking their dogs, as well as concentrations of camping. And then third on there is just collecting all the available water quality data. So that includes our swamp data. There's also compliance and monitoring and special studies that have been conducted over the years, as well as a coordinated monitoring program data that was an effort between the Regional Sanitation District and the Stormwater Partnership. So this slide is kind of an example of some of the information we collected. It's a map provided by the City of Sacramento to show us where their stormwater discharge is and what parts flow into the American River. So kind of the important thing on this map is, so these green areas are the areas that actually flow into the American River. It's kind of surprising, especially when you're in downtown Sacramento right next to the river, that area doesn't actually flow into the American, it flows down to the Sacramento. And these hash marks kind of indicate who owns the sewer district, and so you can see how those do and do not overlap with the stormwater system. The other part, if you can see on here, these little square symbols with an S are all sumps. So I mentioned that this part of the American River has levees. So the stormwater actually has to be collected in sumps and then pumped over the levees. And especially in the summer, that's an important consideration because that stormwater discharge is not going to be constant. It's going to be kind of sporadic pumping. And we need to understand when that's happening and the impact on the river. So we came up with our list of potential sources, kind of the conclusion of that item. So that includes stormwater systems, sanitary sewer overflows, broken or leaking sewer lines, septic tanks, or vaulted toilets in the parkway. Direct human inputs, as well as direct inputs from domestic animals, such as dogs or horses, and of course wildlife. And we're particularly interested in geese since we do see a large number of them at some of our sites. So moving on to that second tier, looking at the times and location of greatest concern. So this graph is kind of getting at the location of greatest concern. And what it has is all of our swamp monitoring stations arranged from upstream on the right, going downstream towards the left side of the graph. And then for each site, so the blue bars are times when each site met the bacteria objectives, and then in the orangish color are times when that site was above our bacteria objectives. And you'll notice that at the upstream end, there's very few occurrences of when those sites were above the objectives, but as you move downstream, that becomes more common. And then the circular graphs at the bottom of the screen kind of summarize that. So the one on the right summarizes from our Lower Sunrise site down to Paradise Beach, that only 3% of the time those sites are above the objectives, in contrast to the section that's from Sutter's Landing down to Scornia Beach, where 43% of the time those sites are above the objective. So kind of look at that, on a map view. I've kind of circled that area of the river on a map. So we kind of want to see what's happening below Paradise Beach to start to cause those problems down to the confluence with the Sacramento River. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is also overlaps with some of our most popular recreation areas, so it is very important to look at. And we have, going back through our data back to 2007, consistently seen elevated E. coli levels in these areas. And there are a lot of potential sources for us to consider looking at.
And have those also shown, spikes according to seasons and things like that?
So that's sort of our next slide. So what I graphed here is just our data from Discovery Park, because that is our site that has the most robust data set. We've monitored it every year of our monitoring. And I've kind of just grouped the data by month, by calendar month. And so each bar shows kind of the range of concentrations we see at that site. And then going to see this blue line tracks the average value through the months. And so while there are exceedances during every month, really it's that summer months where we see the highest levels and the most consistently high levels. Since that also tracks with the highest use period, that's really the time that we want to focus on first.
Do you also take into account homeless encampments?
Yes. So we've talked about that a lot. It's really hard to monitor for that. But pretty much that whole reach is also the highest concentration of campers along the parkway. Yeah.
As I look at this, it's interesting that it isn't a curve at all, that it sort of peaks back up in October, a little bit in December. So it isn't, the highest levels are clearly during the summer, but
Yeah, it definitely is
there's
year-round.
some variability there.
Yeah. So we do want to consider conditions year-round. It's just for kind of that initial prioritization is to look at the summer. And, kind of thinking about dry season, that can extend pretty far into the fall in Sacramento before we actually get rain. So our sampling framework, like I said, initially to focus on the summer recreation season. And then we kind of want to combine those third and fourth tiers from that framework. So that's the sampling and analysis to narrow the list of potential sources and monitoring the extent and magnitude of those sources. And that's so we can really maximize the use of our resources, since field staff and the collection is one of the most expensive parts of that. And one of the things that makes it possible is, so for the DNA markers, we can collect those samples, filter them in a lab, and freeze the filters so that we can be selective about which ones we actually analyze. So for instance, we probably only want to analyze ones where the E. coli is above our bacteria objectives. So we want to know the sources when we have high levels. The other thing that was recommended, just because of the large number of sources and potential sites that we were looking at, was to divide this reach up into two sections and kind of phase our monitoring. So our recommendation is to divide it up into kind of 2 3-mile segments, this total of 6 miles, and work from upstream to downstream. So initially, our focus will be on that section below Paradise Beach down to Sutter's Landing. That is the area that has most of the stormwater sumps and stormwater inputs, so that'll be very interesting. And because those sumps that we're talking about, they don't pump regularly, what we talked about is having concurrent monitoring in the actual sumps instead of trying to monitor that in the river and guess when those are being pumped. And then we'll be able to use that information and what we learned to kind of inform the next phase of the study, looking downstream from Sutter's Landing to the confluence. So next steps, we already have a meeting scheduled for June 17th with our stakeholders to hopefully finalize our sampling plan and figure out the logistics of how we're going to make that happen. We also need to finalize the funding and get commitments for that. So the estimate we were given was somewhere between 250 and 500,000 for this study. Some of that does depend on, how many DNA markers we analyze for. And we do hope to kind of minimize those costs, perhaps through like in-kind contributions or other possibilities. Our goal is to hopefully start sampling this summer. I think the estimate we were given is we need about 30 samples at each site to really look at the range of conditions. So I don't know that we'll get there this summer, but we at least would like to get started. We also want to form an advisory panel, so that'll include our stakeholders who have a lot of local knowledge about what's going on in the river, but also hopefully some experts in the bacteria source tracking, so that we can work with them and review the data as it becomes available and adapt our monitoring strategy to make sure we answer the questions. So we want to know what these sources are. We also need to know as we go along if we need additional data to answer those questions. So I've talked a lot about the Lower American River. I also just wanted to point out that our swamp team is monitoring a couple of other water bodies this summer to look at recreational beneficial uses. So swamp staff and here in our Rancho Cordova office are actually out today monitoring Stockton urban waterways, and they're working closely with citizens from the Bodie community in that area, and we'll probably be getting some help to collect the samples there. And then swamp staff and our Fresno office are monitoring some sites on the upper San Joaquin River. And we don't quite have it up yet, but we do hope to also share these results in online maps so that they'll be available for the public. And with that, I'll ask if you have any other questions for me.
Yeah, when the numbers get high in the summer, do they ban swimming in the lower Sacramento?
No. So currently in California and actually nationwide, there aren't any requirements for posting at inland freshwater beaches. And even on the coastal waterways, if you got elevated levels, they don't close the beach. They'd probably just issue a caution or a warning to make the public aware of it. Typically, they only close the beach if there's like a sewage spill or some kind of outbreak. I have been looking into that a lot.
I think the website's terrific. How many hits do we get on the website? Do you have any idea?
I haven't checked recently. I know last year we did like some press releases and other things, and we definitely got a big spike. It kind of tapers off after that, but
It's very good outreach.
Could you go back to that online map of E. coli and click on Steelhead? Go back
if you
to
want to, I can't.
It's number 8, I think. And click on Steelhead Creek.
So I don't actually. This is
It's
just a
not live?
screenshot. Yeah, I don't have it live, but
I have it live because you put this QRC code up here, and I could.
yeah.
And I was kind of amazed because there wasn't much change in this one. I mean, it's a little bit high, but on Steelhead Creek, it went from the last one on 529 at 1,733 to 2,420. And the reason I bring that up is this doesn't look like such a big problem, but when you look at Steelhead Creek, you begin to see the magnitude of the problem.
Yeah, and we are just at the start of the summer recreation season, so we'll see as water levels drop what happens.
Any further comments or questions?
Yeah, I always wonder about the role of citizen science also helping out with this. Could include, academics with good qualifications who would contribute with some of the labor and effort to get some of these data sets that we need. So, just an idea.
That is something we've done in some other watersheds, and I know there is, particularly on Steelhead Creek, there are some very interested local citizens.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
All right, and I will, I think my comment to this presentation, aside from the excellent work that's being done, one of the things that we've been talking about in front of the board is that the price tag on that study. That is very significant, and we are going to be looking to dischargers in that area, and a lot of that will fall on the potentially on the storm sewer system and the sewer system in that area to make sure that there are not impacts to the water body. So I don't take that lightly. That is a significant burden for anybody to lift. But we're going to be working actively to try and figure out how we can get in kind to try and keep that number low. But at the end of the day, we need to get that study done. And the folks that are responsible for moving stormwater and human sewage in that area are the folks we're going to look to help fund that study in a big way. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to ask, but I think it's the right thing to protect water quality in this area.
And I'll say that when we were up for confirmation, this is the question that came up from every single person we talked to. Everybody that we talked to had a different interest, but the one thing they all had in common was this issue. I mean, it's been big in the paper, and, I know that 32 illnesses, for that family, it's a really big deal. So even one is a really big deal. So I can appreciate the expense of this going forward, but this is kind of a banner issue that the public looks at as sort of a banner issue for what the water board, this regional water board does. So to the extent that I can tell you that I fully support the path and I really appreciate the work, I'm totally on board.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that feedback. I mean, I think the bottom line is, entities and I think myself, if I was asked to pay for a study that analyzed both sources that were not within my control, say some of the natural background E. coli that is in the water body, and the stuff that may or may not be the responsibility of my agency, I'd balk at that a little bit. But at the end of the day, the study needs to be done, and so we're going to be asking the dischargers to help fund that study in a big way.
And yes, that study not only should be done, it must be done. And I think certainly I, as a board member, support you going to the stakeholders to get the funding that's needed for that. It's the kind of data that is vital if we are to properly manage water quality on this stream.
Well, I think it also goes beyond the study is, 10, 20 years down the line, we need long-term monitoring and good records to track how things are trending.
That's my point, yeah.
I have another little data question.
Sure.
Is the outfall of Steelhead Creek is right near the Sacramento River. It outfalls into the American River. And I'm wondering how much the high concentrations found on Steelhead Creek affect the concentrations at Discovery Park and the other park.
So Steelhead Creek discharges to the Sacramento River.
Directly into the river?
Just upstream. But during levels or times of high flow, the whole park does flood, and it's kind of a mix.
Thanks.
Any further comment? Thank you very much for your time. We've got a lot of things on the agenda today, and so talking with the executive officer and assistant executive officer, we're juggling items a bit to make the best use of our time. We're going to go for lunch, and it may run a little bit at past 12. We're going to go to agenda item 11, which is the Hathaway LLC, Kern Tulare Water District, and Jasmine Ranchos Mutual Water Company, Jasmine Treatment Facility, WDR's Kern County. This is a time and place for a hearing to consider waste discharge requirements for Hathaway, Kern Tulare Water District, and Jasmine Water Company in Kern County. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published for the meeting agenda. This time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer, I do. Thank you. The designated parties are Hathaway, Kern Tulare Water District, Jasmine Ranchos Mutual Water District. The total times allowed for testimony, cross-examination, and closing statements are as follows. Hathaway LLC and Kern Tulare Water District, 10 minutes. Center for Biological Diversity, 10 minutes. All other persons are interested persons and shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes, and a timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before testifying. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
There was one late comment letter submitted by the Center for Biological Diversity. Because that was submitted after the comment deadline, it was denied from admission into the administrative
And
record.
that, I was consulted on that. That was
Yes.
way, way late, and we have to hold the line on those things. Very good. We'll now begin with a staff presentation, excuse me.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Josh Mahoney, and I'm a Water Resource Control Engineer with your Fresno office, and I've taken the oath. Today, I'll be discussing proposed waste discharge requirements for the reuse of blended oil field produced wastewater for irrigation operated by Hathaway LLC, Kern Tulare Water District, and the Jasmine Ranchos Mutual Water Company. I will start my presentation with an overview of the proposed project, followed by the project location and facility information. Then, I will discuss key items and requirements of the proposed order. Lastly, I will talk about staff's responses to public comments regarding the proposed order. The proposed order being considered for adoption would regulate the expansion of an existing project currently under waste discharge requirements. The current WDRs were adopted by the board in 1998 and permit the discharge and reuse of oil field produced wastewater from Hathaway LLC to Kern Tulare Water District and the Jasmine Ranchos Mutual Water Company. The proposed order would update the WDRs for the existing project and would also permit the following: the construction and use of the new Guzman Reservoir and a phased approach to increase the flow rate of the existing project. As shown in this aerial image, the majority of the project is located in the southwest corner of Highways 155 and 65 and is approximately 9 miles east of Delano and approximately 9.5 miles northeast of McFarland. This aerial image shows a close-up of the proposed project. The Jasmine Treatment Facility is located near the top right-hand corner of the image and is the source of treated produced wastewater for this project. Produced wastewater is currently discharged to the Jasmine Ranchos Reservoir and the Big Four Reservoir located south and west of the Jasmine Treatment Facility. The Guzman Reservoir, shown near the middle of the image, is the new reservoir included in the proposed expansion. The area shaded in red highlights the 3,700 acres of citrus, grapes, and pistachios currently irrigated with produced wastewater. Under the proposed order, the cropland irrigated with produced wastewater would not change. The image on the screen is the Jasmine Treatment Facility, which is owned and operated by Hathaway LLC and is located in the Jasmine oil field. Production fluid, which is a combination of produced wastewater and crude oil, is pumped to this facility for treatment. The red box shows the initial treatment equipment, which consists of oil water separation tanks and 2 air flotation treatment systems, commonly referred to as WEMCOs. The secondary treatment system consists of 7 ponds, designed to remove residual oil from produced wastewater. Produced wastewater flows through the ponds in series, starting at the northernmost pond and ending in the south. Residual oil that may accumulate in the ponds is removed during skimming activities as needed. Ponds 1, 2, and 3 are shown by the yellow boxes and are the first ponds in the series. Due to the presence of oil on the water surface, these ponds are netted to preclude the entry of wildlife. This slide provides a brief overview of the reservoirs and the distribution system of the proposed expansion. Produced wastewater, represented by yellow, is transferred from the Jasmine Treatment Facility to the Jasmine or Guzman reservoirs. The Guzman Reservoir would be used as a storage reservoir and would transfer produced wastewater to the Big Four Reservoir as needed. The Big Four Reservoir would be a blending reservoir for produced wastewater, surface water, and groundwater. Blended produced wastewater from the Big Four Reservoir, represented by white, would be pumped to cropland for irrigation and the Jasmine Reservoir for additional blending. The Jasmine Reservoir would receive water from the following: produced wastewater from the Jasmine Treatment Facility, blended produced wastewater from the Big Four reservoir, and groundwater. Blended produced wastewater in the Jasmine Reservoir would also be pumped to cropland for irrigation. Under the current WDRs for the existing project, the dischargers have been required to collect samples of produced wastewater and blended produced wastewater since 1998. In 2016, the required water quality analysis was increased to include general minerals, volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile organic compounds, metals, total petroleum hydrocarbons, and stable isotopes of oxygen and hydrogen. Attachment 1 of the information sheet in the proposed order includes a summary of the water quality results for quarters 1, 2, and 3 in 2018. This summary also includes drinking water standards, where they exist. As shown in Attachment 1, detectable results in produced wastewater and blended produced wastewater are below drinking water standards. Included in your agenda package is the proposed order developed by staff for this project. The proposed order identifies specific prohibitions regarding the discharge of waste that are not described in the order. The following are prohibited: waste to surface water or surface water drainages, hazardous materials, fluids used in well stimulation treatment, produced wastewater from wells that have undergone well stimulation, and untreated or partially treated waste. The proposed order includes effluent limitations for produced wastewater from the Jasmine Treatment Facility and blended produced wastewater reused for irrigation. Effluent limitations include daily maximum limits for oil and grease, annual average limits for electrical conductivity, boron, and chloride. And lastly, the proposed order includes a provision to increase the annual maximum flow rate. If adopted, the initial maximum flow rate would be 2,640 acre-feet per year. To increase the flow rate to 3,320 acre-feet per year, the dischargers would need to submit a technical report to the Central Valley Water Board that demonstrates the Jasmine Treatment Facility is designed and constructed to treat the produced wastewater to the quality described in the proposed order. This technical report would be subject to approval by the executive officer. The proposed order identifies discharge specifications that outline specific regulatory requirements. Discharge specifications state that the Jasmine Treatment Facility, Big Four Reservoir, Guzman Reservoir, and the Jasmine Ranchos Mutual Water Company Reservoir shall have adequate seasonal capacity, be free of visible oil or oil accumulation, or effectively netted to preclude the entry of wildlife, and shall also not have objectionable odors that are perceivable beyond the limits of the facilities at an intensity that creates or threatens to create nuisance conditions. The proposed order includes groundwater limitations. The groundwater limitations include maximum limits for boron and Title 22 constituents. Also, the proposed order states that groundwater shall not contain taste or odor-reducing constituents, toxic substances, or any other constituents in concentrations that cause nuisance or adversely affect beneficial uses. The proposed order includes monitoring and reporting requirements for the following. The produced wastewater monitoring section would require continuous flow monitoring and quarterly water quality analysis. The irrigation water monitoring section would require flow monitoring, acreage of cropland receiving produced wastewater, and crop type reports. The chemicals and additives monitoring section would require the discharger to identify chemicals and additives that are used during petroleum exploration, production, and treatment. Also, this section will require the volume, mass, and safety data sheets for chemicals and additives identified by the discharger. And lastly, the groundwater monitoring section includes a time schedule for the design and installation of a groundwater monitoring well network, subject to review and approval by the executive officer. After the monitoring well network is complete, groundwater monitoring would consist of depth-to-water measurements and quarterly water quality analysis. This completes the summary of the proposed order. This slide identifies the parties that submitted comments regarding the proposed order. Included in your agenda package is a copy of Water Board staff's written response to these parties. In support of the proposed order, the Water Board received letters from Hathaway LLC, Kern-Tulare Water District, Jasmine Ranchos Mutual Water Company, and 8 individual letters. The letter from Hathaway and Kern-Tulare included a comment regarding groundwater and produced wastewater monitoring, which has been resolved and is reflected in the proposed order. The 8 individual letters are from elected officials and organization leaders. The letter opposing the proposed order was prepared by the Center for Biological Diversity. In the upcoming slides, I will go over the comments from CBD and staff's response. CBD states that the proposed discharge of produced wastewater is anticipated to degrade groundwater quality. Also, CBD states that the constituents in the produced wastewater as a result of petroleum-related chemicals and additives have been identified as a potential concern to the environment and human health. Staff's response is that the board may authorize a discharge that causes some degradation of groundwater quality, provided the discharge complies with the state anti-degradation policy. The application for the proposed project includes an anti-degradation analysis. The findings and information sheet of the proposed order discuss the information in the analysis and the issue of degradation. Staff believes the discharge, as proposed and regulated by the proposed order, would meet the requirements of the state anti-degradation policy. To ensure the discharge complies with the state anti-degradation policy, this order would require ongoing monitoring of the discharge and the implementation of groundwater monitoring near the reservoirs. If the discharge causes degradation of groundwater exceeding that authorized in this order, the discharger would be subject to formal enforcement actions by the board. With regard to constituents of concern, staff's response is that produced wastewater would be analyzed for the oilfield chemical list, which is comprised of constituents that may be in produced wastewater due to chemicals and additives used during petroleum exploration, production, and treatment. Also, analytical results available in attachment 1 of the information sheet show that detectable concentrations in the discharge are below drinking water standards. And lastly, staff assembled the food safety expert panel comprised of experts in the field of toxicology, biology, and agriculture. The food safety expert panel was assembled to provide the board with recommendations regarding potential impacts that may be associated with the reuse of produced wastewater for irrigation. To date, staff has not identified evidence that the reuse of produced wastewater for irrigation poses a threat to human health or crop safety. CBD states that the best practicable treatment or control measures are not supported by an independent analysis or consideration by the board. Also, CBD states that the measures proposed for this project were not considered for the removal of constituents known to be in produced wastewater that may pose a threat to human health. Staff's response is that BPTC is site-specific. Staff believes that the measures, as implemented through the proposed order, adequately represent BPTC for this project. In addition, the proposed discharge is not anticipated to cause degradation that would adversely affect the beneficial uses of groundwater, resulting in the need for additional measures. CBD states that an inspection by the Division of Safety of Dams reported that the Big Four Reservoir has erosion channels that needed to be fixed and may create a pathway for produced wastewater to be discharged to local surface waterways. Also, CBD states that the proposed order does not consider runoff to local surface water due to erosion channels or the structural failure of the reservoirs. In response to this comment, staff contacted the Division of Safety of Dams regarding the erosion channels at the Big Four Reservoir. Division of Safety of Dams staff stated that the erosion channels were noted as part of maintenance issues and did not appear to pose a threat to the structural integrity of the unit. Division of Safety of Dams staff is also working with Kern-Tulare Water District to develop an erosion maintenance plan to address this issue. With regard to maintenance requirements, the proposed order requires the dischargers to inspect the ponds and reservoirs annually to assess repair and maintenance needed for slope failure, changes in site conditions that could impact the integrity of the units, and erosion and sedimentation control. The proposed order also includes Discharge Prohibition A1, which prohibits the discharge of waste to surface water or surface water drainages. Violation of this prohibition would subject the dischargers to formal enforcement actions by the board. Staff believes that regulatory requirements by the Division of Safety of Dams and the Water Board, annual inspections of the reservoirs by the dischargers, and the prohibition are adequate to ensure that local surface waters are protected under the proposed order. CBD states that a 2017 study by Dr. William Stringfellow identified a significant overlap between chemicals used during well stimulation activities and those used routinely during development activities. CBD states that this practice should be prohibited since produced wastewater from stimulated wells is prohibited in the proposed order. Staff's response is that water quality data shown in the information sheet identifies detectable concentrations below drinking water standards. Also, the proposed order requires quarterly monitoring of the oilfield chemical list to ensure that produced wastewater does not contain constituents of concern at concentrations that are known to be harmful to human health. And lastly, the Food Safety Expert Panel, third-party consultant group under the Food Safety MOU, and board staff are reviewing the practice of using produced wastewater to determine potential threats to crop safety and human health. To date, the group have not identified threats to human health or crop safety from the reuse of produced wastewater for irrigation. Upon determination that the reuse of produced wastewater poses a threat, this order would be reopened to address that threat.
Excuse me, I have a couple questions, clarifications questions. Could you go back one slide?
Yep.
When you say submitted to Food Safety Expert Panel for review, is that then reviewed at a noticed meeting that's open to the public?
Yes, those are open meetings that are available to the public.
All right, but the report that the panel is putting together on this is still unavailable to the public for review?
We have a draft outline that's available, and we're working on that. That's been available to the public during the meetings.
You have a draft outline of their report. That is available now for...
Correct. That's posted on the website.
Thank you.
All right. CBD states that the discharge of produced wastewater to the ponds at the Jasmine Treatment Facility, Guzman Reservoir, Big Four Reservoir, and the Jasmine Ranchos Mutual Water Company Reservoir may adversely impact wildlife and ecosystems in the area. Based on the study by Dr. Stringfellow, identified in the previous comment, CBD states that the chemicals present in the produced wastewater may cause harm to wildlife or ecosystems as a result of open water bodies permitted under the proposed order. Also, CBD states that the proposed order does not require any mechanisms to ensure that the water bodies are free of oil. Staff's response is that the proposed order prohibits the discharge of fluids used in well stimulation and produced wastewater from wells that have undergone well stimulation. As shown in attachment 1 of the information sheet, detected results in produced wastewater are below drinking water standards. In addition, Water Board staff has not received any evidence that demonstrates the constituents or concentrations in the produced wastewater pose a threat to wildlife. With regard to oil-impacted ponds, the proposed order prohibits the discharge of untreated or partially treated waste, which would include oil in produced wastewater discharged to ponds. Also, the proposed order requires the ponds and reservoirs to be free of oil or effectively netted to preclude the entry of wildlife. Violation of either prohibition would result in enforcement actions by the Central Valley Water Board. CBD states that 1,2-dibromo-3-chloropropane and 1,2-dibromoethane are carcinogens and may be present in the produced wastewater above drinking water standards. Staff's response is that the laboratory results for these constituents did not yield detectable results, but the minimum detection limit was slightly greater than the maximum contaminant level for drinking water. As shown on the slide, the minimum detection limit, or MDL, for these constituents is slightly greater than the maximum contaminant level for drinking water, or MCL. These MDLs are reportedly the lowest level achievable by the laboratory. These constituents were included in the analysis of the produced wastewater since they are required as part of the general analysis for volatile organic compounds using Method 8260B. With regard to the presence of these constituents in the produced wastewater, the two constituents are not included in the oilfield chemical list or the 2017 study by Dr. Stringfellow, which was cited by CBD in an earlier comment. These two constituents are normally associated with pesticides and are not expected to be present in the discharge. Since these constituents have not been detected in the discharge and are not associated with petroleum-related activities, staff believes that the discharge complies with the state anti-degradation policy and is appropriate for irrigation reuse. CBD states that the environmental impact report prepared by Kern Tulare Water District for the proposed project is inadequate since it does not consider the following. 1. Does not examine chemicals and additives that may be in produced wastewater. 2. Does not consider impacts to wildlife and human health due to the storage of produced wastewater in open water bodies and the reuse of produced wastewater for irrigation. And 3. Does not properly assess all aspects of the project and project alternatives, including a no project alternative. Staff's response is that the EIR, prepared by Kern Tulare Water District, was submitted to the State Clearinghouse and circulated for public comment and review. As part of this process, the Central Valley Water Board was consulted during the development and circulation of the EIR. As a responsible agency, the Central Valley Water Board must presume that the EIR is legally valid since the EIR was finalized in accordance with CEQA. In response to this comment, staff modified finding 64 of the proposed order to demonstrate that Kern Tulare's EIR is in compliance with CEQA. This completes staff's response to comments regarding the proposed order. In summary, the proposed order would permit the reuse of produced wastewater as a supplemental source of irrigation water in an area that is susceptible to water shortages and drought conditions. As described in the EIR, the produced wastewater is a drought-tolerant source of water that is suitable for irrigation reuse. As shown in the anti-degradation analysis for this project, detectable concentrations of the produced wastewater are below drinking water standards. Also, the findings and the information sheet of the proposed order outline staff's assessment that the proposed expansion appears to comply with the state anti-degradation policy. To ensure compliance with the state anti-degradation policy, the proposed order includes an extensive monitoring and reporting program. Under the proposed MRP, the dischargers are required to submit specific information to the Water Board for review. Violation of the MRP or the provisions or prohibitions identified in the proposed order would result in enforcement actions by the Board. Staff's recommendation is for the Board to adopt the proposed order as written. This concludes my presentation. I request my testimony, this presentation, and the case file be entered in the record. Are there any questions?
Excuse me, I wanted to go back again to this food safety expert panel report, and there's a draft out, I understand that. What's the process for getting to a final report?
Mr. Schneider, let me answer that. I'm Clay Rogers, the Assistant Executive Officer with the Fresno office. I want to clarify that there is a draft outline presented. We do not yet have a draft of the report.
Oh, that's somewhat different then, isn't it?
Yeah, we do have a draft of the report. Our plan is to have a draft of the report out for public comment by the end of the year. We're waiting for the last of the fruit sampling to be finished. That should be finished here in just a few weeks. Get those results, and then staff will be drafting that report, presenting it to the board or not to the board, but to the expert panel for review and comment to make sure it meets all of their concerns, because the panel members are all volunteers, so it's a little bit far for us to go to ask them to draft the report, but we are going to ask them all to be signatory to the report, although they can, we can't force them to do that. They can abstain if they or provide information counter to what's in the draft report. But that report, we're thinking, will be available, draft by the end of the calendar year. That's the schedule that we're working on. And then we'll bring that report to the board. I'm fairly certain we'll have an information item to go over the specifics and talk about that.
So that would probably be in January.
I would anticipate perhaps the February board meeting would be when that would be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no stimulated wells in this area?
No.
Any further comments? Thank you very much. This time, President presentation by Hathaway LLC and Kern Tulare Water District.
It's tough before lunch because I know everybody's hungry. And my name's Chad Hathaway. I'm the owner of Hathaway LLC. I thought it was important to come up here and speak with you folks today in support of this project. I employ about 30 people in the Bakersfield Delano area and have operated this oil field for the past 13 years. Real quickly, none of these wells are fracked. There's no stimulation here. It's a highly permeable reservoir where it's a strong water drive, which is how the oil goes to the wellbore. I wanted to come here today and tell you personally that I'm pleased to comply with the state water policies that are encouraging reuse and recycling of produced water. I know also personally, as the head of a regional GSA here in this area, a water management area that I helped form with about 8,000 acres of other landowners in the area, that the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in this heavily overdrafted basin is going to heavily affect us in this area. And looking at the potential for reducing farmland and fallowing up to 25% of that is terrifying to a lot of us in the area. And these regional type of resilient water supplies that we've had are very important. You know, I'm going to cut right through this and turn it over to Steve, but we work daily with your organization, and we work daily with the Division of Oil and Gas, and we work daily with the regulators and the people in our community, and it's very important that we do that. Where I live and where my children live and where my friends and family live, which is all around these fields, is important to me. And that's probably one of the most important things I wanted to come here to convey to you today, and that we're committed to working with your organization or with your the water board like we have over the last 13 years that we've been operating this field, and I hope that all of the issues that have been addressed, and we're also excited and very encouraged and working with the food safety expert panel and seeing what they come up with. I as well farm in the area. I'm as well concerned, and I'll also make sure that we continue to support that process. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Steve Dahlke. I'm the general manager for Kern Tulare Water District, and I've taken the oath. Kern Tulare Water District is located in an area that's critically short of water. This project provides about 2,600 acre-feet of water to our water district, which is desperately needed. The district's been working with the regional board staff to ensure that the water we're receiving is suitable for irrigation and safe for crop production. And the source of this water is delivered under an existing WDR and MRP, and that's been in operation since 1998. This proposal adds a 590 acre-foot reservoir to the project. And so that will provide the district with the opportunity to store and better regulate so that we can blend this water more thoroughly, and will assist us with our blending process. And the proposal also significantly increases the testing and monitoring requirements, which we support. And finally, we're in supportive and concur with the staff report. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes.
Do any of the farmers have any reservations about using this water?
We've heard none. We've sent out letters to all of the landowners and have heard nothing. Well, they support getting water.
Yeah, this is always a hard issue for me because, well, it's just such a hard issue. I know that it's hard times, and that forces us to creative solutions. I appreciate the sentiment expressed by the gentleman earlier about how he lives there, his kids live there, and that goes a long way for me, because that's sort of how I measure whether or not I feel like I'm making a responsible decision, right? Am I okay with this, with my decision binding, you know, my family and my neighbors and my friends? And so I'm glad that you said that. I can imagine that, you know, the concern on the other side is, well, is it the wolf watching the hen house, right? Is, you know, the very parties that have an interest that, you know, will gain from this are also the ones that are, you know, monitoring and have some responsibility here. It sounds like I hear commitment to, you know, to reading the food safety panel report and responding. I mean, if there's something in there that's troubling, it sounds like you'll be ready for that and respond appropriately. Certainly, that's what we expect also.
Well, man, we are on an extensive testing program as it is. We test quarterly and provide a quarterly report to the water board that I believe is testing in excess of 170 constituents, if not more than that. It's a substantial process that is submitted on a quarterly basis. So yes, we're extremely committed. I can tell you financially, I'm very committed to this.
I understand.
And as representative of the farmers, we're absolutely committed to making sure that this water is safe. That if it's found unsafe, that's going to change the way they can sell their fruit.
Yeah, no, and I understand that, and so I know that there's a commitment, and we talked about this at the Fresno meeting, that, given California's stellar reputation for, the commodities that are grown here, we all want water, but not at the expense of that kind of result. So I can see that. It's just that this feels so new and, just feels so new.
It's actually a very established process. In eastern Kern County, a predominance of the produced water is fresh. It's extremely fresh, and the only, which some people call it a contaminant, but I call it a resource, is oil. And we take that oil out and we put the water back in. And I often ask myself, why do I do this? But working with people like Steve, and then also working with my neighbors and friends, this is important. I often ask myself, I've got an exempted aquifer, why don't I just put it right back in the ground where it came from again? But at the same time, it's like this is an asset and a resource, and it's been something that benefits a lot of us in that area.
I have a couple follow-up questions. One, how deep are you extracting your oil?
True vertical depth's about 2,900 feet.
So that is in any range where you might start getting subsidence from oil extraction or water extraction?
No, sir, we have an extremely strong water drive here.
You have no subsidence in the region?
Not
Okay.
due to the oil field, sir.
Well, I'm having a little trouble with that, but that's okay. Here's my issue, and I'm letting you know so we'll have some time to respond to it. But I've always tried to balance a little bit economic issues, and particularly in communities like this, with my responsibility to regulate and water quality. And I'm not doubting your commitment to water quality, but a lot of what decision I make resides on this food safety expert panel, and we don't have a report, and we don't have something that the public can really respond to, and we're not very far off. So as I think about this, I'm thinking this has been a process that's been going on for the 2,600 and some acre feet. I'm very leery to think about adding to that at this point in time without that report. And that's kind of where I might be coming down on this. So think about that when you do your rebuttals and stuff, please.
Well, this does feel like Fresno's meeting, right, Carmen? Yes. All over again. And my comments are going to be very similar to what I stated during our Fresno meeting. And being on the food safety panel, and we've never had any results come up, correct? So everything that's been tested so far has been clean. And I think that's really important to note at this moment. And again, Carmen, I know we talked about this last, 2 months ago. The water detection limits on this are good and clean, and the science is clean, and I think that's really important when we're dealing with anything when it comes to regulating water quality. We have to definitely lean on our science. And I understand your concerns about the actual report, but can you address the food safety panel? I know a little bit about the process and actually what we've been testing and what's come up so far.
Absolutely. Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office again. So let me clarify a couple things. I mean, there is a very extensive testing program for all the general mineral chemicals that we would expect associated with salinity. And then there is a very an additional that we add even above what landfills are, and that is all the chemicals that the oil companies are required to report to us that could potentially be in the wastewater. So that means if they add a gallon of some specific chemical during maintenance of a well, that is reported to us, and then that constituent is added to their monitoring program for the water that is received and used. So we test for more than just the chemicals that are detected in the water. We test for all of the chemicals that are used. I do want to clarify, we also have the fruit safety sampling, the fruit sampling that has gone on, that analyzes for most of those same chemicals. We have detected a few compounds in there, but the organic compounds that we detect, most of them have been explained to me by Dr. William Stringfellow, our science advisor, are naturally occurring organic compounds that accumulate in fruit as the fruit matures. You get these different constituents that occur naturally. We test not only the fruit that is treated, what we call treated or has wastewater applied to it, we also test the same number of what are called control samples, which are fields that are irrigated with no produced water and have not been irrigated with produced water. And then we compare the two results. We have not seen any significant difference between the two that would lead us to believe that there is an issue with the safety of the fruit that has been grown. We're in the process of making sure that every vegetable, nut, fruit that is grown in these areas is analyzed. For most of them, we have multiple. We're trying to pick up a few, like this spring we picked up cherries, although I'll have to be corrected. I think we actually got a legal declaration by the grower of the cherries that he uses groundwater and does not use produced water on his cherries. But we have some crops, I think there were blueberries that that had never been tested before. Or did I get that backwards?
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, I got it backwards. The blueberries have not been irrigated with produced water, and the cherries have. But we're picking those things up to make absolutely certain that every crop is sampled at least once. The major crops like the citrus and the nuts, we have multiple samples at multiple locations from both receiving produced water. We haven't seen anything that has been of concern to the toxicologists and our science advisors. So we're waiting to get those results, which is the primary reason the report has been delayed, is we have to get the consultants to finish their analysis of the data, and then we can put the final reports together for that.
And
But
also, what's contributed to this being drug out too is your, which I commend you for, insistence that enough data be collected that you have statistically valid results. And this has resulted in multiple sampling episodes.
You know, I don't really actually question the science, and I appreciate the work that's been done. I think I'm talking about a process issue. And normally, in a perfect world, you would complete this report and then make your decisions.
Well, this report was to be done some time ago.
That's not the issue.
Yes, it
No.
is. and
Well,
I have
not
to
for a
disagree with
process
you.
issue.
And
Let me finish, please.
No, the process has
I would like to
unfortunately
finish my
been-
question and comment.
You certainly can, go ahead.
Thank you. So the process issue seems to be where I'm hung up on, because in a perfect world, that's what I would do, is get the report completed and then make my decisions. We don't live in that kind of world. We have to make decisions. And in Fresno, as Raju said, we made a decision that kept, economic issues and families in business and didn't put them out of business. The question here is not this first part about what's going on now. The question I'm having is, how can I justify, based on my concept of process, moving ahead with an increase in the amount of discharge? And that's kind of where I'm hung up. So thank you for listening, and that's what I'll be talking about. But the science, yeah, I really think that's, but it isn't, I mean, you can sit there and say it, and the public can probably go in and talk about it and look at the results, but it isn't like you can pull up something and say, let me double check this. It isn't like it can be peer reviewed by some scientist that hasn't been on this panel yet, you know, so there's legitimate science issues also about the process. Thanks.
And I might say, Bob, I respect certainly respect your opinion that it's not here for you to look at, and that you don't have the benefit of hearing what experts, seeing what experts have come to conclusions about one way or the other. With that said, any further questions, comments? Thank you very much.
You'd asked a question on subsidence, which I didn't have an opportunity to answer.
Go ahead.
We recently completed a groundwater sustainability plan for the region, and part of that was to identify and map the subsidence. And we found quite a bit of subsidence happening north and west of our region and our water district. But we didn't find any subsidence in the area where the Jasmine Field is, which is where the source of this water is. So that was a good question on subsidence. And then also you'd talked about the, well, I guess it's important to note that we're not proposing a change in the program other than to add a reservoir. And the reservoir adds storage, which allows us to better blend the water. So all the testing that's going on now will continue to go on.
Thank you. Any further questions?
No, and just as a comment, I just, and this is just kind of a general thing. I always think that it's important to, especially on an issue like this, to require maybe a higher standard as we are, right? A lot of times we look at this, we understand the narrative, we trust our staff, we trust the science, we're happy to go along with it because that's what, you know, that's who we rely on. And we are relying on them here. And the reason that I like to continue to show my skepticism is because I still want to continue to hold things to a high standard. You know, we can't be asleep at the switch, and I don't think anybody is up here. But when something as innovative as what is being proposed here is happening, I think we owe it to ourselves and to the citizens and to future generations just to, you know, ask the questions. So I appreciate the science. I have no reason to doubt that the people that are participating are diligent. But when something like this is happening, I like to push back. So I, you know, appreciate the dialogue and the engagement and the commitment from all sides. So I look forward to hearing what CBD has to say also.
Thank you. Center for Biological Diversity. Bill, are you speaking on their behalf? Come on.
CBD could not be present today. I think, Bill, you're speaking for Clean Water Action.
Hi, I'm Bill Alio with the Environmental Working Group, and I took the oath. I'm also speaking for Clean Water Action. We've jointly submitted comments on these oil-produced water to food or crop irrigation projects for a few years now. A couple of notes. First, a question to staff. I looked on the website just now. I don't see a draft report from the food safety panel yet, or the staff. Is there something online, Clay?
Yeah, as I tried to clarify to Board Member Schneider, there is no draft report yet. What we have is the draft outline that has been discussed at the public meetings And I'm going to ask staff to make sure that that draft outline is on the website come first of next week.
Got it, thanks. Our position on this has been, I know EWG for sure, not necessarily Clean Water Action, is that if this is proven to be a safe process and procedure, we have no problem with it. It is as when the first project was approved here when I was present, the board members said it's a great conjunctive use. It would be. But let's be clear too, the main thing driving this is the lack of water in California at times, and also the cost. And in this case, the cost is much, much cheaper for a farmer to buy it from the oil company after it's lightly treated than it is to pump it themselves or get it from the State Water Project by a magnitude of 3 to 5 times. I mean, we're talking $30 an acre for, I don't know what the numbers are today versus 3 years ago, versus $130 to $180 an acre foot. So there's a clear economic incentive for these projects to keep taking place and to keep expanding. So we've objected to each new project, and we're objecting to the expansion of this project because it hasn't been proven safe yet. This is just keep putting the cart before the horse. The Food Safety Panel has not concluded anything yet. The data they've got is limited, and I know there was a question about so far has everything tested been clean, and it looks that way. In fact, randomly taking things not irrigated with produced water and ones that are, you might find a constituent higher in a non-irrigated or non-produced water fruit. So there's this, so far it looks good, and that's good. We don't want to see bad constituents end up in food that people are producing. We absolutely don't. We just want to make sure we're doing the right thing here. And I just think you should be denying all these projects until we know. And maybe that would spur the work of the Food Safety Panel faster. We're glad all the money's being spent on monitoring, the Duke study and the State Water Board's money to get numbers, so we have numbers. But a few notes on this. One is that saying we meet drinking water standards is meaningful but not significant, because if you look at the state's drinking water standards, most of the constituents are different than what's being put into an oil reservoir or for drilling maintenance and those things. We're not concerned about fracking on the east side of the valley. It's mostly in the center and the west side of the valley, and so that's not a big concern. But as Dr. Stringfellow's report showed, and with Seth Shonkoff, a member of the Food Safety Panel, there's a large overlap in what you use in fracking chemicals and what you use in everyday oil drilling, whether it's enhanced oil recovery, steam flooding, water flooding, cyclic steam flooding, or whether you're using acid matrix stimulation or hydraulic fracturing. There's a lot of overlap. And then once the well is established, you need to do clean outs and maintenance. All those chemicals are used very likely the same whether you're in the Belridge field or here on the east side. So you can't say, well, we're not fracking, so things look good. We do not know. See from my other notes. Groundwater shall not contain toxic substances was one of the requirements in the WDR. But we're not sure what those toxic substances are. And I'm glad it's now monitoring. And that's, I think, one of the big improvements we've seen here in the number of years I've been coming to the Central Valley Board, is that now we're finally monitoring the oil fields, the groundwater, the open pits. We're shut down some open pits. We're so far improved over what we were just a few years ago. And the same with the Division of Oil and Gas. And the sort of forced marriage, which was on paper between this regional board and Division of Oil and Gas, or DOGGR, now through a new formalized MOU, is great. And so money's flowing to get staff to do the studies, monitoring. We're far away better off than we were a few years ago when I discovered we weren't even regulating fracking in 2011, which was the case. And this board wasn't properly regulating the disposal permits, and we still think you're not properly regulating the use of this produced water for irrigating agriculture. To me, it's like the one last thing bugging me, and I come here because you should just be denying these permits. Say, sorry, we don't know yet. And when we get to that safety point, then fine, approve them all and keep increasing the use of this. This is a good conjunctive use once proven safe. Let's prove it safe and then proceed. Lastly, the thing that's bothered me the most, and I've emphasized this in every single time I appear before the Food Safety Panel or this board, is why hasn't the soil been tested yet? Is there a buildup of these constituents in the soil, which could lead to dust that farm workers inhale, which could lead to growing carrots, onions, root crops that are contaminated, and the only true soil expert, who is an expert on the uptake of plants by these elements, appeared here at this podium, Dr. Banuelos, last year, and he said, I would not grow root crops or tubers in this soil. That's what he said. He's the only expert to appear before the Food Safety Panel. He said he wouldn't do it, and yet it's being done. Now, this project before us today is saying we're just doing tree crops, but that doesn't prohibit them from growing. The WDR says you cannot grow root crops in it, and we continue to grow root crops in the other water districts, irrigation districts to the south. So I just don't understand why the soil wasn't immediately tested and say, you know what, we're clear. It makes one think they don't want to know. Because if there was a buildup of metals, hydrocarbons, various chemicals being used upstream, and said, oops, so why not get it over with and just immediately go out and test instead of waiting for, whoops, let's get the citrus off the tree as much as, and we'll add cherries and all that. It's just avoiding the 800-pound gorilla possibly in the room. Test the soil. So we're protecting farm workers. We're protecting people who eat organic carrots on a daily basis at the Natural Foods Co-op that are grown in Kern County at Grimway Farms, who I understand stopped using this water some time ago. Is it because of the new scrutiny on it? I don't know. So that remains a frustration. Maybe there won't be root crops grown in this project, but I don't know, down the road they could. So that completes our comments for Clean Water Action. We shared a lot of the concerns that CBD did as presented in the staff report. We feel that some of the answers that were given by staff, the responses, are not adequate, but that's as far as I'll go on addressing that. Thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate Mr. Snyder's, I think his stance is correct, which is why expand it till we know the results, which I assume you could apply to another new project that could come in. And I sat here, or I was here 3 years ago and said, are there more of these projects being proposed? And Mr. Rogers said, yes, there's more in the pipeline. Is there yet another one in 6 months or next year? There might be, I don't know, but we're not any further along to finding out, is this safe for consumers and farm workers? Let's not forget the people who work every day, who do enjoy the jobs in the oil industry that pay really well, or the lower paying jobs in the people working in the fields. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Aliud? Thank you for your comments, Bill. Thank you for your involvement in the project as it's gone along. Very good. I'll take closing comments then by Hathaway LLC and Kern Tulare Water District. Before you give your closing comments, I had a card from Mr. Aliud for interested persons. I have no other cards for interested persons. Is there anybody here who would like to testify as an interested person? Seeing none, I just wanted that for the record. Go ahead with your comments, please.
Do I need to restate that I'm under oath? Am I good?
No,
Okay.
go ahead.
I have no comments to close. I just have responses whenever it's appropriate to do so.
Any questions?
Now would be the time.
This closing comments.
Right
Thank
now?
you very much, sir.
Now would be the time. Yeah.
Now would be the time. Well, I want to appreciate the CBD and Mr. Aliev's comments as well. I want to be very specific about this because we do a substantial amount of testing on a regular basis and have for years. And this water has been used in Kern County for agricultural purposes for decades. Decades upon decades this has been done. And we don't have a big, huge shining star, a huge, big glaring issue. I want to continue to reiterate the amount of testing and work and specific science that we do on a regular basis. I want to address the EOR point that was brought up. We do 0 EOR, 0 steam injection, and 0 water injection because this water is going. Acidation occurs, like what he just mentioned, occurs in injection wells predominantly in Kern County, and for acid stimulation in very rare occurrences. So acid is for injection wells to clean them up to open up perforations. The chemicals he's discussing during drilling, jasmine, which is when we drill a well in jasmine, the cuttings from all the drilling activities are contained on surface. They are taken and trucked off-site. So there's no drilling. Drilling occurs very infrequently. We've probably drilled a total of 35 wells in this field over the last 13 years. So it's not an active drilling boom basin. We have to work with our agricultural neighbors to do that in the first place. Cost. That is a direct, we charge Kern Tulare, just to be candid, $150 an acre foot. That's not cheap. That's not cheap free water. They pay for that water because they're paying substantially more than that for water from the state when they can get it. So I wanted to be very specific about the cost as well. And then let's also look at, we operate right now under an existing WDR that's been in place. It actually goes all the way back to the 70s, but the most recent one I believe is 1998. So this has been going on here for a long, long time. And we've been here working with our neighbors and doing this. I want to make sure those things are completely clear to you all, that stuff does not occur and the science is happening on a regular basis at Jasmine.
There was also concern raised about produced water being used on root crops. And in Kern Tulare Water District, the farmers grow almonds, pistachios, grapes, and citrus. And reviewing the crop history since 1977, which is when we've been in place, there have not been root crops ever planted in Kern Tulare.
Very good. Thank you very much. Closing statement by staff.
So I'll handle a closing statement and essentially a recommendation from the executive officer at the same time. Looking at these projects on the whole, I think I'm fascinated by the fact that we're having this conversation, because ordinarily our work begins and ends with the water quality in the aquifer. That's where the beneficial uses are, and that's what we're charged with protecting. In this case, there is no issue about the water quality that's affected in the aquifer. Instead, I think, and I think it's absolutely appropriate, this board and the board staff stepped out and said, you know, these activities, they raise some concerns, certainly from the community, that we feel need to be addressed. So we stepped out of our comfort zone, convened a panel of experts to look at not just water chemistry testing, but testing of food crops. And that's not something ordinarily that this board does. Theoretically, we could be doing this with all manner of different types of agricultural commodities, but this was special. I think this board made the decision, and Clay made the decision that this is special. It deserved additional scrutiny. Let's convene an expert panel. The expert panel is also informed by a lot, as I mentioned, a lot of very extensive testing. The testing thus far, and I think we have had resounding comments from the expert panel that there's no red flags, absolutely no red flags here. So what we're waiting for really is the bow on all that, and that's the final report of the expert panel. For my purposes, I would almost feel comfortable recommending adoption of this proposed set of waste discharge requirements simply on the fact that the water, its effect on the underground aquifer is not raising any concerns for our engineers and scientists. But I think with this project, I'm comfortable recommending it. Adoption of these waste discharge requirements, because we have that component, and we also have extensive food crop testing that is showing no red flags. That is above and beyond what just about anybody else is doing anywhere in the United States. And so I do think that it is concerning, and it's certainly a policy decision for the board that we don't have a expert panel report yet. But from my perspective, I believe that the board would be supported in moving forward with this project while that final report is under development. Again, if there was any red flag that had been noted by the expert panel in the food safety testing, I would not be recommending this, even though it is probably beyond where we would ordinarily go with respect to our water quality waste discharge requirements. I know Bill mentioned, and I think it is concerning to everybody at the regional board, soil testing. I think when we get into soil testing, it's one of those concerns that has not been extensively studied in many aspects of agriculture, whether it's pesticide buildups in non-oil field irrigated agriculture, whether it's certain soil types that haven't been subject to extensive pesticide applications, whether it's dry farming. You know, this is the type of emerging concerns that we're looking at for worker safety. But, you know, I think it's something that the board has pledged to be a part of, producing that science and developing that science as time moves on. You know, I'd be concerned if there's any health issues related to the use of agricultural practices and this interaction between workers and soil in the Central Valley. It's something I know the Air Board is working on, and it's something I know that CDFA is working on. So it's a multi-pronged approach to address these type of issues. And I think that it is appropriate to discuss oil field impacts and soil quality in that context. So with that, I think that's my recommendation is to move forward with these waste discharge requirements. And I would certainly respect the position of the board if it felt that we needed to put a pause on this until the food safety expert panel delivered its final report. But from where I sit today, I believe that it is worthwhile moving forward with these waste discharge requirements.
I have a question. I'm curious what else is in the pipeline at this point in time.
Bob, just 1 second. I'd just like to close the hearing. Go on with your question. Go on with your question.
Yeah, that's my question is.
Yeah. Clay? The question would be whether there's any reports of waste discharge that the board is reviewing for additional projects.
Hi, this is Clay Rogers again, Assistant Executive Officer. To our knowledge, we don't currently have any new projects on crops for human consumption. We do, however, have a report of waste discharge for what's known as Mill Creek Properties Little Creek Properties, excuse me, that's more familiar to me. Little Creek Properties that does actually use some produced water to feed the cattle. So that is another issue that has been concerning. Has not been a topic of the expert panel, but we may have to touch base with the expert panel on this particular issue as well.
So we're down the road a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any more
Nothing
projects, Member Schneider, regarding crops for human consumption.
And I assume it's going to take a couple of months to build this reservoir in this project. So I'm thinking, trying to make it all work out, that by the time this project is done, or shortly thereafter, we will have at least a draft report.
I think a lot of the construction is already completed on this project.
Yeah, I think we're a little ways along the line, but certainly I want to also tell the board, and I'm sure Patrick supports this, that if we come across any evidence that says that this is an issue, we'll be taking whatever steps we need to take action just as quickly as can be taken to change course.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that was certainly my next question. And I think that is probably where I'm going to go, and that'll, resolve the issue for me about process, because that is important. The public perception of are we doing our job is critical. And I do believe what you said completely about where the science is and I don't expect any red flags at all. So, but I think we're close enough to say this report will be done close enough to when this starts, we will know if there are any red flags,
Yeah.
and we will revisit this issue.
And to be frank, I would I think it's tough to make that commitment with the academics.
Understood.
We're going to work as hard as we can to get this
Understood.
report done.
Understand.
In
And
the
I hope
final
you
draft
guys
of the
understand too my dilemma here a little bit, and I'm just trying to resolve this issue that I can say yes to the
Yeah,
project.
a little more clarification on the timing, and some of the strings might be appropriate. Steve can speak to the timing, and Dale Harvey, Supervising Engineer, Fresno office, have taken the.
I'd rather you speak to it because we've closed.
Oh, okay. My understanding is that part of the funding for this reservoir is coming from the State Water Resources Control Board, and they cannot obtain that funding until they have a set of waste discharge requirements in place.
That's correct.
And I'm not too sure exactly what the timing of the construction schedule is right now.
Yeah, well, you know, I think our executive officer made some he has a habit of making very elucidating comments. And if this project was located in certain other areas, particularly closer to I-5, I would not support it. It's where this water is this stuff is laying on top of the oil really, and picks up some oil. The water quality there is quite good, and as Clay's mentioned before, this oil, as I understand it, actually migrated in over the top of the water body, and you don't have the kinds of issues that you would expect farther south. The other part is the fact that the testimony from Dr. Banuelos has been mentioned already. Dr. Banuelos went on to say that he's really not concerned about the organics in these crops, particularly the tree crops. He's concerned about inorganics. And we haven't seen, in fact, where we got a hit in an inorganic was in a control sample, not in a sample being irrigated with this water. So I guess that's why, you know, I support this, whereas I would not support a project like this until we have a lot more data farther south. Any other comments by board members?
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Well, I appreciate Patrick's comment, and as Dr. Longley said, you always have a way of bringing it all together. And I think it was absolutely, you nailed it on the head with every point you made about this. And to my fellow board members, I guess being on the food safety panel, I do have, just being a part of the process, I feel more comfortable with this because it's something we've been talking about at such a length. And every time the results do come in, it does give you a sense of comfort when you know these results are coming back, there's no red flags. And because of that, I can feel more comfortable than maybe you do, Carmen, about certain things with produced water and their effects. So again, I appreciate Patrick's comment. I think this, you know, it makes sense to approve this project and go forward.
Any further comments? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a
second.
Been moved and seconded. Roll call.
I just want to, in terms of further
One
discussion.
moment before you go to the roll.
In terms of further discussion, I just want to say that I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate all of the discussion, all sides, I thought was exemplary, actually. And I think my concerns have been adequately addressed, so I'm going to support this also.
Call the roll.
Ms. Brower?
Yes.
Dr. Markham?
Aye.
Mr. Schneider?
Aye.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. It is now 1:45. How long is it, what's the minimum amount of time we can take for lunch?
I think that depends on how quick you can eat. We have a very short closed session. Do you have the citation for that one? We have a very short closed session, but I think that, you know, I can't imagine that would take more than, say, 15 minutes or so. And so it's up to you how much longer we want,
Yeah,
with a couple
does 40
minutes to get back there and
Does
get back
45
here.
minutes seem appropriate? We got a busy afternoon. Very good. We'll be back here by 1:30, please.
Yeah, and real quick to announce the closed session, we'll have our attorney.
We spend another 15 minutes before they look at the record.
It is item H under litigation filed by the Central Valley Water Board against other parties, Orland Sand and Gravel Facility.
Thank you very much. We're recessed until 1:30.